Hello everyone, it's Theme Park Avenue, I'm Eric. Welcome to Epic Universe Reviews, a series of videos reviewing each of the 11 rides at the all-new Universal's Epic Universe theme park at Universal Orlando Resort. In each video, I will talk about my experience on one of the rides, provide useful information about it, and provide some final thoughts on how good the ride is. Let's begin this series with the first ride I experienced, Hiccup's Wing Gliders. This ride is a family-friendly multi-launch coaster manufactured by Intamin, the same company that built Hagrid's. Spoilers for both of those rides ahead, in case you haven't seen Hagrid's POV somehow. But let's dive in. Hagrid's is obviously a very highly acclaimed ride. Sometimes it's called the best roller coaster in the world. I certainly like Hagrid's. Its pacing, scenery, and atmosphere are all pretty much top-notch. But I enjoy Hiccup's Wing Gliders as well, and I might even prefer it. Let's talk about the queue for Hiccups before comparing the ride experiences. If you love highly themed queues, you're in luck at Epic Universe, but Hiccup is not really among the best in this regard. Entering through Hiccup's house, it looks quite nice. That's a fun start, and the roller coaster passing over the queue is a beauty for a roller coaster fan like myself. But there aren't many other notable elements otherwise. It's not a bad queue, but the remaining themed elements are sparse until the solid loading platform, and there's not much shade. This allows for great roller coaster views, but if you have to wait in the line a while, you'll be grateful for the water fountain they installed. Most Epic Universe rides have drinking fountains at some point in the queues, and I'm very happy those exist. I can't recall seeing that at any other North American amusement park, and overall, the queue is an okay start, with the view of the ride being what will get you the most excited. Now for the ride itself. This ride is a dual loading platform, meaning that the operators load 2 trains at a time. Once one is sent, the other one's already getting prepared for dispatch. You'll be told to go to one side or the other, and these are the exact same ride experience. Choosing one or the other side does not alter it at all, so don't request a specific side. You can request a specific row, and while results potentially can vary, other rides at the park have taught me that usually you can wait from the front if you want that, even if somebody else got assigned it first. You have to wait one extra train, but based on my front row experience, that might be worth it. Once you board, you embark on a journey that bears many similarities to Hagrid's. Big spoilers right here. Apart from being a family launch coaster, both of these are particularly scenic rides, tell stories of magical creature experts sending you on expeditions, both take place on vehicles that don't work as planned, contain numerous magical creatures, feature moments where the train goes backwards unexpectedly, and contain onboard audio with great music and copious dialogue from the creature expert. Admittedly, comparing Hiccup and Hagrid themselves as magical creature experts is vague, but the coasters clearly have similar stories, theming, and track elements. There are differences, but the rides do have some similar strengths. So let's talk through the full experience of Hiccup's Wing Gliders and draw comparisons to Hagrid's along the way. When you leave the station on Hiccup's, Hiccup himself immediately speaks to you through the onboard audio. I learned through POVs that there is more than one audio track for this ride. On each of 6 audio tracks, Hiccup has different dialogue and therefore different jokes, which I find a lot of fun. This first part of the ride is a simple way to get you to the first show scene, and it makes up for a lack of notable thriller theming elements with the stellar music taken from the How to Train Your Dragon film. The iconic song that plays through most of the ride is known as Test Drive, and has always been the perfect fit for a theme park attraction due to its mix of whimsy and intensity. Even if it's your first time hearing the song, I think this music is universal. I don't know anyone who dislikes it. I'm super glad this ride exists for the use of the music alone. After a few small turns, the first show scene begins. Here, you see an impressive Hiccup animatronic, and an even more impressive Toothless one. Hiccup tries to install the wings on your glider, which is the vehicle you're riding in. However, Toothless hits the launch button too early, and you go flying without wings, meaning the name of the ride is technically false advertising. You soar over Berk as the music swells, you pass several scenic sights, and you hear Hiccup talking frantically as he tries to figure out how to keep you safe. Highlights of this first section include flying over the queue and walkway, meaning guests look up at you as if you really were a dragon, soaring over and diving into a beautifully atmospheric tunnel, and circling the iconic sheep from the How to Train Your Dragon films. The music with a smile on my face, and while the forces don't throw you out of your seat, the moderate speed and zippy turns make this section feel very fun and complete, even though it's under 30 seconds long. My one issue is that I struggled to understand what Hiccup was saying most of the time. To draw my first comparison to Hagrid's, I think Hagrid's voice was a lot clearer. I'm not sure if there was an outside noise drowning out Hiccup, an issue with audio levels, or a problem with my listening skills. But I definitely missed some of the things Hiccup said that I think could have added to the fun factor of the ride. I was sometimes trying to listen to him so much that it drew focus away from the scenery, but still, this section is a blast. At this point, we enter the second show scene, taking place in a nest for a dragon species known as gronkles. Certain audio tracks note that gronkle eggs hatch in hot areas and explode upon hatching, making them very dangerous. Some audio tracks might miss this detail, as I recall Coaster Studios saying he was confused about the concern for the gronkles. I also missed the exploding egg tidbit, and I assumed the reason we were concerned was based on the movies. For those who don't know, How to Train Your Dragon 2 notably mentions that baby dragons don't listen to anyone. Therefore, I thought the concern was that the baby gronkles attacking us would not be able to stop because Hiccup couldn't train them. There was also the possible issue that since no mother gronkles were present, the babies might think our glider was the mother, and that would be messed up. But anyway, the train launches forward but does not clear the next hill, meaning you fall back into the gronkle nest as some begin hatching. Then, you launch over the hill, and the stellar music continues. This final section begins with a turn into a structure full of dragon houses, similar to birdhouses. You pass some static dragon figures, and I love how close you get to them. The final section is back where you began, flying over some lush grass with views of Stardust Racers to your left, and an ugly area outside of park boundary straight ahead. This sightline issue has been mentioned before, and I guess the ride would feel more immersive if they built a structure to hide the backstage. However, I do like how open and expansive the final area feels as you soar to the finish, so I'm fine with just waiting for the trees to grow out in this one. I believe Hagrid's received this complaint to a degree back when it opened as well, but it's certainly less of an issue because the ride is further from park boundaries and is somewhat faster than Hiccup. Despite the sightline, I find this to be a very enjoyable final section of the coaster, and a great end to the experience. Overall, I love Hiccup swing gliders. I've recently found myself very impressed by many family coasters that don't necessarily blow your mind with thrills or theming, but provide excellent and well-paced experiences with memorable moments and unforgettable atmosphere. I was really smiling the whole way through on this one, especially in the main roller coaster portions. My only notable complaint is not being able to understand what Hiccup was saying, but I could always hear that gorgeous music. It's one of the best family coasters I've done for sure, but is it better than Hagrid's? Well, I've come to the conclusion that while the rides have similarities, the experiences really can be quite different. Hagrid's is definitely the more thrilling coaster, which appeals to me as someone who's much more amused by thrills than theming in general. However, that's not the be-all end-all, because there are some family coasters like Big Bear Mountain and Dollywood, where I have so much fun on them that I even prefer them to rides like Hagrid's, even if their theming is a little more bare bones. Big Bear Mountain is my favorite family coaster, with less surrounding theming than Hiccup, but equally strong pacing, superior dialogue, and maybe better music. Big Bear Mountain has a killer fiddle-based soundtrack that really hits home the location and the nature of this adventure. The moment you hit the final launch and the fiddle hits a crescendo is one of my favorite moments on any roller coaster, and it's genuinely not thrilling at all. Hagrid's also has a moment I especially like that I think is the ultimate reason I prefer it to Hiccup. I actually have more fun on the main roller coaster sections of Hiccup due to the music feeling less perilous and more whimsical, but the indoor section of Hagrid's is almost unmatched when it comes to Universal's themed experiences. I was so impressed by it on my first ride, and it remains a highlight. Hiccup certainly keeps me entertained the whole way through, but it didn't have any moments that hit me quite like the one on Big Bear Mountain or the one on Hagrid's. Compared to Hagrid specifically, its show scenes just aren't quite as strong as those. Hiccup is a consistently fun and beautiful ride that I love for the reasons I've said and more, but it's not one that will necessarily blow everyone away. However, if you love the How to Train Your Dragon films, there's a chance it will do exactly that. To end this review, I will be giving the ride a number score out of 10. A 1 means it's among the absolute worst of Universal attractions, such as Fast and Furious Supercharged. A 10 means it's among the absolute best of Universal attractions, such as Velocicoaster or Spider-Man. Those scores are just my opinion, as is the Hiccup score. For the ride's final score, I decided on a very strong 8 out of 10. There are very few improvements that could be made, and it almost got a 9. But there are other rides with better standout moments that I would give 9s and 10s. Granted, this high score should tell you that just being a fun and well thought out ride, is more than enough for greatness. For the second video of this series, I am reviewing Fyre Drill, a mock ride splash battle in the Isle of Berk. Spoilers for the ride incoming. For those who have been with my channel for a while, you may recall that I have already made a video calling Fyre Drill the park's most overlooked ride. I went in more hyped to ride it than most other rides in the park due to my previous experience with this excellent ride model. However, the park opened and I saw many lists calling Fyre Drill the worst ride in the park. People don't normally hate it, but I wondered if my excitement for the ride was misguided. Fortunately, I loved the ride, and I might consider it the most underrated ride at Epic Universe. Let's talk about why by going through the ride experience. As you approach the ride, you see a very pleasant entrance sign that gets across the theme of the ride well with the fire icon, spraying water, and the zibbleback dragons piloted by the movie characters Rough Nut and Tough Nut. Once in the queue, you see plenty of signs helping you understand the story and mechanics of the ride. To briefly explain the story, Rough Nut and Tough Nut made a model of Berk with some creative liberties, featuring targets for you to shoot with water cannons. The targets have fire icons on them, because the point is to help teach you how to put out fires in Berk. But since the characters who made the course are twins that often compete, there's an added competition element. Each side of the boat is either Team Rough Nut or Team Tough Nut. But there's no scorekeeping like many rides of this sort. Instead, the competition is between other boats. Sometimes, your boat will pass another one that's moving the opposite direction. And this is when you are face to face with people from the opposing team, and you can shoot them with the water cannons. When I rode, nobody was on the other boats because it was the start of the day. But I know from other splash battles that as long as you're in the mood to get wet, these parts are a lot of fun. Besides these moments, you'll be floating around the course on the boat, shooting targets with your water cannons, and triggering some fun visual and audio cues just like a shooting dark ride. There's no points being tracked or given, but it's still satisfying to hear a ding every time you get the target spinning. It's also worth noting that many of the targets trigger water effects that will likely hit you, and other people on your boat, from both sides in fact, can hit targets that will hit somebody else. So if you want to avoid as many water features as possible, you have to hope your boat is full of people who are bad at hitting targets. One additional note on getting wet is that the seats will almost definitely be wet once you get on, so keep that in mind. Besides the water features, the two key elements of this ride that will determine how much you enjoy it are the sets and the mechanics. I think one of these elements is great, and the other is a bit mixed. The sets are fantastic. The style is simple, but I love the way it looks, and the surrounding rockwork is realistic enough to make it feel like a training course within Berk. The designs honestly feel straight out of the movies, and there is so much going on in the sets that if you take a break from target practice and enjoy the scenery, you'll be pleased. The boats look stunning, and the interactive elements of these sets are awesome. My favorite part is when a target triggers a Viking to chop down a tree, causing a loud boom. This movement is visually creative and super fun. All of the target responses are pretty simple, but I think it works fine because they don't draw too much attention away from the targets, avoiding the issue of sensory overload. All in all, this is a gorgeous ride that offers a super fun journey through a well-designed course. The other element to talk about is the shooting itself, and there are things I like about it. Most notably, this ride takes some skill to win. If you shoot the center of the target, nothing will happen. The targets are spinners with the axis in the center of the structure, so you have to hit the top or bottom of the target to cause it to spin and trigger the effects. That's not always easy. I had many instances where I got the target to spin partway, but then return to its original form before flipping, kinda like another ride in Berk. This skill issue might be frustrating for some guests, but as long as you can figure out how the targets work, whether through watching this video or just noticing the way the targets move when you don't hit them dead center, you'll be able to get some of the effects going. It's very rewarding when the target spins around several times after a great hit, so I love the way they design the targets. My bigger issue is with the water cannons themselves. On many splash battles, you fire the cannons by continuously turning a crank. It's easy to turn, but doing it quickly can be taxing for your arm. I assume Universal was afraid of that complaint, so they got cannons that are activated by simply pulling a handle toward you, releasing a jet of water. You don't constantly need to pump, just pull the handle back, keep it back, and the water will spray for a bit. This was probably the right call for the Universal audience to an extent, but my issue with this change is that the water stops after a certain while, and you have to put the handle back forward, and then pull it again to keep shooting. not a huge deal, but on the other splash battles, you have complete control over when the water stops. When I face other boats in the other splash battles, I pump like mad until the water can't reach them anymore. In this ride, I would just pull back the handle, the water would stop before the other boat was out of range, and then I have to re-pull the handle one more time. This latter scenario is a lot less fun and competitive. Therefore, I prefer the mechanism of other splash battles, and I'd say the interactions with other boats and people with cannons are a bit worse here than others of the same model. Overall, I had a great time on Fyre Drill. The shooting is slightly less engaging than the other rides of the splash battle model, but the targets and sets more than make up for that. I won't say exactly where I rank it at Epic Universe because I'm working on a ranking of all the rides after I review the rest, but I can tell you it's not at the bottom. Not even bottom 3. If you dislike getting wet on theme park attractions, sure, this isn't for you. Though I do have a video with tips on avoiding getting wet on this ride. If you do enjoy water rides, this one offers a super fun experience through and through, with top-notch theming and fun surprises galore. The story is genuinely very well constructed given how simple the ride is, and even though it's not an original ride model, it's one that I always have a blast on. I do prefer the splash battle called Battle Galleons at Alton Towers in the UK, because it is one of the best queues in theme park history and better competitive elements. But this one has much better sets, and I highly recommend it if you go to Epic Universe. To end this review, I will be giving the ride a number score out of 10. A 1 means it's among the absolute worst of Universal attractions, like Fast and Furious Supercharged. A 10 means it's among the very best, such as Velocicoaster or Spider-Man. Those scores are just my opinion, as is the score for Fyre Drill. For Fyre Drill's score, I will give it a 7 out of 10. It is the weakest Universal water ride, though the 3 Islands of Adventure are among the very best in the country, and it's still an absolute joy through and through that I personally think is worth a ride to Epic Universe. For the third video of this series, I am reviewing Dragon Racers Rally, a Gerslara Skyflyer in the Isle of Berk area of the park. Spoilers for the ride incoming. In my opinion, this is the least interesting and most skippable ride at Epic Universe, and I'm sure some others agree. However, it's not a terrible ride and there is plenty to enjoy, so maybe you'll love it. Let's talk about the full ride experience and see if there's anything truly great about this ride. Beginning with the queue, I must say I enjoy it a lot. There are fun murals showing dragons, trophies from previous dragon races, and signs with instructions on training and racing dragons. There might also be signs explaining how the ride works and all, but I didn't see any. The story of the ride seems to be that you are in a vehicle that prepares you for actually flying on a dragon. But I'm unsure if you're supposed to be flying with the dragon that's built in the structure, or if that dragon is pulling you along. Not a big deal, but I prefer when a ride's story is clearly communicated. The queue's greatest strength is that it's positioned next to one of my favorite sections of the area's roller coaster, Hiccup's Wing Gliders. It's when the train passes through the dragon houses, and you can watch it happen from this queue. The view is somewhat obscured by the queue building, but at least that means this queue building is well shaded. This is good, because the line does not move quickly. This ride is a thrilling flat ride, and these rarely have a very high capacity. The park actually built 2 Skyflyers to help with the issue, but when each one can only fit 12 people at a time, the ride just doesn't keep the line moving. I recommend hitting this early if you plan to hit it at all, so let's talk about the things that will help you decide whether or not you want to ride it in the first place. Before boarding, you can watch the ride in action, as well as some fun animations on screens in the loading area. It is worth noting that this ride is beautiful to look at. That's not unusual for Epic Universe rides, especially the berk ones as they're all outdoors and can be seen practically in full. I love watching the ride cycle as the statue of the dragon soars through the air, and then as the mechanism rotates, the dragon racers themselves soar in the air. The ride does go pretty high up, so you can even see it from Celestial Park. Some might prefer to not see berk until they enter it, but I personally love being able to watch this grand flat ride and the beautiful Stardust Racers run at the same time. It's definitely more fun to watch than the average flat ride, due to the great design of the structure and that dragon statue. So watching the ride is pretty cool. Maybe more so than riding it, because the ride experience just doesn't offer much of note in my opinion. Once you're in your seat, you have 2 handles in front of you that can be used to turn the wings upward or downward. Once the ride begins, you soar up high and continue a circular path that takes you down toward the ground and up above berk. At this point, you might want to just sit back and enjoy the views of the park. This is pretty much the only ride in the park that offers any sort of view from above. I guess Stardust Racers has its moments of that where it's facing the rest of the park, but those are rare, low to the ground, and very fast. Therefore, one perk of this ride is that while the views are not super long or especially stellar here, this is the closest thing you can get to an observational ride at Epic Universe. And I at the very least enjoy overlooking Berk and Hiccup's wing gliders. If you find just sitting and looking around boring, you can control the wings and attempt to flip upside down. That's what this ride model was really made for. By moving the wings, you can sometimes get yourself to spin around horizontally. I know people who have spun 17 times in a row on Skyflyer attractions. Unfortunately, I don't know anyone who has done so on Dragon Racers Rally. There's a YouTuber called The Coaster Josh, who if I remember correctly, rode this ride 3 times and only got a flip on the 3rd attempt. I have to know what his secret was because I personally did not flip on my one ride. I thought pushing one wing down and the other up would do the trick, and it certainly got me to rotate and almost face upside down, but I never completed a flip, and that seems to be a very common experience. I've never done another Skyflyer, but being unable to actually experience the intended thrilling part of a flat ride was very disappointing for me. I suppose the wings are just not built as well for spinning. Maybe because they're bulkier and better painted, so the bigger theming elements makes them less built for the actual spinning. I personally would have taken uglier wings if it meant being able to flip more easily. As is, the ride lacks the thrills it could have provided. The other issue is the ride's duration. Presumably due to how low capacity this ride is, and not wanting the line to build up too much, the ride cycle feels very short. I can't imagine the mechanism completed more than 6 rotations while I was on it, and I therefore had even less chances to flip than I might have on other versions of this model. The short duration and difficulty with flipping take away a lot of the fun that I imagine the other Skyflyers provide in bucket loads. Overall, I think this ride is a bit of a mediocre experience. Its queue and appearance are nice, and it does have the unique strength of giving views of the park, but it doesn't have the thrill I expect from a flat ride. Let me be clear that I love a good flat ride. I generally prefer them to dark rides, in fact. There are flat rides I've done that I would take over every single ride at Universal Orlando Resort, but those rides offer longer experiences with much more intense and unpredictable thrills. This ride could be much closer to that level of amusement if you could flip more, and therefore truly make this ride different every time. As is, it's my least favorite ride at Epic Universe. To end this review, I will be giving the ride a number score out of 10. A 1 means it is among the absolute worst of Universal attractions such as Fast and Furious Supercharged. A 10 means it's among the absolute best, such as Velocicoaster or Spider-Man. Those scores are just my opinion, as is the score for Dragon Racers Rally. I was torn on what to score this one because I don't hate it and I didn't want to give it something super harsh. I was thinking of giving it a 5 out of 10, but it just doesn't have enough strength to put it above other rides that I might give a 5. Therefore, I'm giving Dragon Racers Rally a 4 out of 10. It's not the worst thing ever, and maybe you'll be an expert at flipping when you ride it. But for me, it's an underwhelming ride and definitely the least fun of Epic Universe's 11 rides. For the 4th video of this series, I am reviewing Stardust Racers, the mock ride's dueling launch coaster that headlines Celestial Park. Spoilers for the ride incoming. Let's get one thing out of the way from the get-go. This is quite easily the best ride at Epic Universe from my perspective. For those who are unaware of who I am and clicked on a video by Theme Park Avenue thinking I'd be a big theming guy, the truth is that I am a roller coaster enthusiast first and foremost. I love roller coasters. They are my favorite type of theme park ride by a mile, and I went to Epic Universe already sort of knowing Stardust Racers would be the winner. However, the ride pulls off an impressive feat, being enjoyable for those who are less accustomed to roller coasters, even with a general lack of theming. Let's talk about what makes Stardust Racers so great for everyone. First off, the entrance experience. Stardust Racers is beautiful as you walk up to it. When the trains leave the station, they go toward the main path before turning around and then entering a tunnel. Later on, the trains return to this main area before entering the second launch and moving away once again. Couple the view of the intertwining coasters with the comet statue, fog effects, and rockwork, and you have one heck of a first impression. Additionally, the ride's entrance sign is very nice. It looks old-fashioned, and the spinning elements make the comics more dynamic a lot of fun. Hands down, my favorite entrance sign of the park, due to that sense of style. As for the queue, it's designed to look like a train station, and it certainly does. The theme of the ride is that the Celestians, the people of Celestial Park, used to ride comets as a standard set of transport, and now you can do the same. By being in the queue, you understand the idea that it's not a race to see who wins, but rather the trains departing at the same time and racing through the cosmos. However, the idea that you're riding a comet, or any sort of transportation system really, is sort of lost save for the general design of the queue. I didn't know that you were supposed to be riding on a comet until after I went to the park. I wish there were some small theming elements in the queue that explain this sort of old transportation system theme. For example, when the two trains leave the station, they could have an announcement in the same vein as a train station one, declaring that the comets are now departing. This would be so simple, but add a lot not only to the aesthetic, but also understanding the ride's story. I realize it's a very minor issue, the theme is not a super important part of the ride after all, and I can still piece together most of it. But since the ride does have an interesting story, I kind of wish it was further explored in the queue. But hey, that's not the main focus of the ride, so let's talk about the ride itself. This ride provides an experience that greatly appeals to the thrill seeker in me, but also has unique strengths that practically no other roller coaster can match. The experience begins as well as any other roller coaster, with the tracks both leaving the station and heading towards Celestial Park. Soon after, the trains turn around into the tunnel directly underneath the loading platform. This is where the fun begins. Within the tunnel, the ride's first launch appears, and it packs a punch. Certain launches from the manufacturer mock rides like Copperhead Strike at Carowinds have been criticized, but this launch is very powerful. On my first ride, it felt like it had two phases, the launch starting out gentle, and then halfway through pushing me right back into my seat with startling force. The second ride I got felt like it had three phases, but I'm not really sure why. Either way, this is a thrilling start that leads into a very wild first half. The highlight of the first half for me is the airtime. There are great moments of the trains passing over each other, but getting thrown out of your seat on this one is the pinnacle. It happens in such a violent manner in the first two hills, and I never would have expected that. Other great mock rides roller coasters I've done like Hyperia at Thor Park don't have ejector airtime like that. I love being launched out of my seat and into the restraint, and this was a great start. Others will probably prefer the parts where the trains are passing over each other and vice versa, but for me, it's the airtime that wowed me the most in the first half. And to end that first half, the train flies around the queue area again and enters a second launch. This launch builds up more speed and sends you into the best moment not only in Stardust Racers, but in all of Epic Universe. This moment is the Celestial Spin. As you scale the highest point of the ride, the green track enters a 0G roll that wraps around the yellow one just as that one enters a barrel roll drop and wraps around the green. These inversions are not super fast, but this moment is a spectacle as the two trains beautifully pass over each other. You feel so close to the other train as you go through the inversions, it's a magical moment. But it's not the end. I do find the remainder of the ride to be less thrilling than the first half, but it's just as enjoyable because the track passes over each other even more. The overbank turn is a super fun moment, and yet another with that crossing over. Throughout the rest of the ride, you dash toward the end and cross over the other track plenty more times. The ride's pacing definitely feels slower than Velocicoaster, the ride is a bit slower after all, but the dueling makes the ride just as much fun as you head into the final brake run. This layout and experience is exactly what it should have been. A graceful yet thrilling adventure with two tracks interacting with each other. The layout is packed with airtime, but it works in tandem with the racing element to be even more memorable than it would otherwise. The other key element that makes it memorable is the music. This ride is a beautiful soundtrack that plays through onboard audio, which is not new for Universal. Coasters like Hulk have great onboard soundtracks too, but this one captures a more unique ambiance with an ethereal sound that still feels thrilling and grand, but it's just so beautiful. If you're new to roller coasters and you ride this, you'll likely be blown away by the experience of racing alongside another train. The gorgeous song really ties that all together. This ride is intense as a whole, but it's also quite accessible. Some of those strongest elements contribute to a sense of transporting you to a new world, as opposed to being big adrenaline rushes. Additionally, the experience further improves at night. Not only does nighttime fit that space theme more, but the light package on the trains is gorgeous, and the music is different. I did not get on the ride at night, but I have friends who prefer the nighttime music, so it's definitely worth doing if you can. This review has been immensely positive so far, but there are 3 criticisms I must address. First, the racing is not guaranteed to work out. When I went to the park, I rode the yellow track in the morning and went out in the evening to ride the other track. On this second ride, the coaster had just reopened from weather delay, and it was running like normal with the racing. That said, the green train stopped at the exit area for an extended period soon after that, not rolling up to the loading area until the yellow train had cycled through 4 times. This meant close to 96 people on the yellow track got no racing because the green trains are stuck. I'm not sure what happened, but it's important to know that the 2 tracks are different and therefore don't run together perfectly every time. Speaking of those tracks, my second criticism is very unnecessary, but still something that baffles me. The tracks are called yellow and green, but there is absolutely no universe in which the green track could be called that color. Those are both yellow. The green one is closer to a gold, maybe it's a yellow-green mix, but I truly don't think the green track lives up to its name. Quick side note before my third and more important criticism, I slightly prefer the green track overall, because I think being the first to go upside down is more fun. Mind you, this ride is so good that I recommend doing both tracks, and if you can only do one ride multiple times at this park, I think this should be the pick. The third criticism is the one thing that will only matter to roller coaster enthusiasts. As much as I love Stardust Racers, it's not quite among my absolute favorite roller coasters. It's probably top 25 out of around 375, but it wouldn't be high up in that top 25, falling below launch coasters from manufacturer Intamin, including Velocicoaster, as well as Maverick at Cedar Point and Pantheon at Busch Gardens Williamsburg. The main thing Intamin coasters do differently from this ride is their pacing. Intamin launch coasters often have very tight turns and intense maneuvers that make the rides feel way faster than they actually are. The best moments on Velocicoaster and Maverick are those where you fly through the elements, most notably Velocicoaster's Mosasaurus roll that you rip through. Stardust Racers has great inversions too, but the faster Velocicoaster one is just more my speed. As a result, I generally prefer Intamin launch coasters and more intense roller coasters in general. However, there's not a single roller coaster Intamin has ever built that captures the magic that Stardust Racers does with that atmosphere and racing. Honestly, if you have 10 park goers ride Stardust Racers and Velocicoaster, I would bet that 8 or 9 of them would prefer Stardust Racers. It's something special that the general audience is bound to love, and I love it too. To end this review, I will be giving the ride a number score out of 10. A 1 means it is among the absolute worst of Universal attractions, like Fast and Furious Supercharged. A 10 means it is among the absolute best of Universal attractions, such as Velocicoaster or Spider-Man. Those scores are just my opinion, as is the score for Stardust Racers. I do prefer Velocicoaster as a whole, but that is my favorite ride in the entire resort. Stardust Racers is now my second favorite, and it is perfect at what it sets out to do. While it doesn't fully appeal to my personal taste, I can't even begin to consider giving it anything less than a 10 out of 10. It is without a doubt the best ride at Epic Universe in my opinion, and it might be a game changer for this kind of experience in the future. We'll just have to see. For the 5th video in this series, I am reviewing Monsters Unchained, the Frankenstein Experiment. Spoilers incoming. Monsters Unchained might have been the most hyped up ride at Epic Universe. I saw people calling it one of the best dark rides in the world before it even opened. I went in pretty excited for it did sound very impressive and unique. However, I must admit that I am generally not a dark ride fan, especially high budget ones. I am a roller coaster enthusiast first and foremost, and I am much more easily impressed by coasters and thrilling rides than dark rides. When I do love a dark ride, it's usually because of its entertainment value and atmosphere. Shooting dark rides are my favorite type of dark ride for that very reason. I am not at all in the target audience for Monsters Unchained in general, and I wouldn't call it one of my favorite theme park rides as a whole. However, I would call it one of my favorite dark rides. Before visiting Epic Universe, my favorite dark ride in the world was far and away The Amazing Adventures of Spider-Man at Islands of Adventure. It's not only super fun and atmospheric, but also had impressive moments. Monsters Unchained has these strengths as well, but is it better than Spider-Man? Is it the best dark ride ever? Well, to the first question, most would say yes right off the bat based on YouTube comments I saw before the ride opened. But let's talk about the experience of Monsters Unchained, covering its strengths and its weaknesses. The start of the experience is pretty much perfect. The castle facade is beautiful, and it's awesome to enter through those grand doors. Maybe it's less impressive than Hogwarts Castle, but it's exactly what it needed to be. As for the queue, I considered using the single rider line to save time, because I heard that that was very fast moving. But I'd also heard that the main queue is one of the best in any park. The main wait was short, and I ended up going for it, and I'm glad I did. The line is almost always moving, so it feels like a walking tour of the Frankenstein castle. You enter some rooms full of details for fans of monsters to catch. I don't know much about the Universal monsters. Go up a set of stairs, pass through several more rooms and show more details about the story, like Victoria, Frankenstein, and Igor encountering the monsters, and a vampire bat in a flashy containment unit. And then you come out to a balcony that overlooks the stairwell, and is under some fun tubes with lighting effects. This all indicates the experiment is underway, and is a great walking attraction pretty much. It's just the queue too. But after that, you enter the first of two pre-shows. I must say, these are the best pre-shows I've ever experienced. The first one sees Igor on a screen explaining that you will board a vehicle that he controls remotely. He demonstrates how it moves, and this was actually where I learned that the ride system was the KUKA robotic arm that Forbidden Journey uses, and I was very happy to see that. It is a phenomenal dark ride system. It allows for dynamic movement and close-ups of certain scenes. This first scene is not only enjoyable because of the miniature robot arm that I like watching, but also because Igor is super entertaining. He's very high energy and speaks in a creepy way. His last line is very ominous, "The doctor will see you now." There's a ton of personality in the animation and performance, it's impossible not to love it. After this, Igor sends you into the room of the main pre-show. If all works according to plan, Dr. Victoria Frankenstein presents her new and improved animatronic of the monster that everybody inaccurately calls Frankenstein. Assuming the ride works as it's meant to, the characters are both animatronics. These animatronics are fantastic, moving so fluidly and naturally. Many of the movements are just hand gestures that make the scenes a little more active, but there are some inspired choices. For example, there's a subtle change in Victoria's face and her arms when she cracks a joke. Additionally, the monster has a wider range of motion when his fears are triggered, and my personal favorite part is when he points and motions for you to enter the next room at the end of the pre-show. The story is explained in a very simple way here. Victoria has captured and controlled the other Universal monsters, and she built her own monster, and now she's going to try to take control of Count Dracula. But he seems like he's not fully contained, as his spirit interrupts the pre-show. The only issue with the story is that Victoria's motivation isn't entirely clear to me. I think she's trying to control the monsters to prove they're not that scary, especially her own monster. However, controlling these fully sentient creatures seems kind of messed up, and I wonder if Victoria is supposed to be a morally gray character. I don't know for sure, but I do know she simultaneously wants acceptance from other people and control over all the monsters. Still, she is a very interesting and memorable character, thanks to her great vocal performance and interesting, if convoluted, past. The monster is also tons of fun to watch, mostly for his movements. He just kind of exists to do what Victoria says, but he's a lovable iteration of this monster. I love this pre-show. It sets a tone for the ride before the actual main story kicks in, and it's quite memorable. For that reason, I do recommend waiting in the main line. You can probably catch a pretty short wait for it at some point, and even if you can't, it is worth an extra bit of waiting. Now for the ride experience. At the start, you are treated to an exceptional Igor animatronic with more great dialogue as he sends you on your way. In this first scene, you can see the other vehicles in front of you, and I'm fine with that. It's the very start of the ride, you're all supposed to sort of be starting your journey at around the same time, no issue with immersion there. The next room might be the coolest part of the ride to me. You see a monster playing the organ as actual flames come out of it. The music is ominous, the visual is grand, and the arm pulls you in so close to the monster. I learned after the ride that this is apparently the Phantom of the Opera. As someone who only knows him from Broadway, I did not catch that. Another detail I love here is the implication that since the Phantom is also under Victoria's control, she asked him to play this awesome music as she completed her experiments, giving her more personality than just being a scientist. Next up is another great moment where the monster grabs two large electric conductors to channel a current between them, and it looks awesome thanks to both the animatronic and lightning effects. Here is where the actual story gets set into motion. Dracula escapes and says something inaudible before releasing the rest of the monsters. Igor has a hilarious and instantly iconic line that explains to Victoria, and also the audience, what is going on, while still providing some entertainment. Most of the ride beyond this point is just a presentation of the other monsters as they attack you and Victoria fends them off. You see the creature from the Black Lagoon, the Wolfman, looking much cooler than the version at the other ride in this area, and the Mummy, which reminded me of Universal Studios' Revenge of the Mummy. I think it's cool that there's multiple interpretations of one character in this one resort. The mummy scene is probably the least interesting. The animatronic mostly just dangles above you, and he's not as active as most of the others. But it's still alright. After that, Igor and the monster work to channel some sunlight, or at least just some daylight, and reflect it to kill Dracula and his monsters. This was a moment where I clearly noticed the backstage area, and was slightly taken out of the experience as the car seemed to linger there before tilting upward to look at a screen. This is a good time to address one of the few major criticisms people have given this ride. There are moments where the immersion is broken. The other one I noticed was briefly seeing the car in front of me during the Wolfman scene, but others have noticed much more major things that I did not notice. For example, you can see the robotic arm controlling Dracula's first animatronic in some POVs. I missed that, but right after that, you pass by a large curtain as you transition to the next scene. I also somehow missed that, so maybe I just wasn't looking for technical issues, but many have observed those problems. For me, these would not be a big deal even if I did notice them. I think creativity and entertainment are way more important on a dark ride than polish, and I was plenty entertained by the scenes surrounding these parts, so they didn't really bother me much. One issue that might have gotten to me was the now somewhat notorious final Dracula animatronic. When it works, it lunges toward the vehicle before getting shot through the chest with sunlight. This animatronic has not worked for everyone, and I've seen multiple POVs where it was static. For me, the animatronic worked and it was pretty awesome visually, but I do have a big problem with this ending. The story up until this point is very straightforward. Monsters are freed from Victoria's control, you encounter them one by one, yeah. You would expect the ride to end with her beating Dracula, and I don't know if it does or not. The ride ends with you seeing Dracula shot by the light, hearing Victoria say all monsters will bow down to the name Frankenstein, and Igor wishing you on your merry way. So, did the light beam eliminate Dracula? I feel like such a powerful character escaping a high-tech unit and freeing every other monster in seconds shouldn't lose to a nightlight. The ending of the ride was kind of rushed, and the very final moment further confuses me about the fate of Dracula. When Igor says goodbye, he gets attacked by a bunch of bats. They have a red mist around them, and to me that means they're still under Dracula's control, so he can't be gone. I wish the ride made it more clear where the story would go from here, so the conclusion is a bit more clear and satisfying. The other thing I dislike about the ending is that Igor's attacked by so many bats surrounded by red mist, that it looks like he's getting eaten alive and blood is flying everywhere. In reality, it's just a final comedic moment where he gets attacked. I think maybe they should have gone with just one bat hitting him, so it didn't look like a horrifying violent death. Speaking of horrifying violent stuff, the other more common complaint with this ride is that it did not live up to the promise that it would be scary. The preview video about Dark Universe said this would be a borderline PG-13 dark ride. It is very much not, and I wonder if Universal creators were forced to tone down the ride, or if that was just a blatant lie the whole time. The ride has monsters, and there is a dark atmosphere in general, but there's no intentional gore, no jump scares, and the atmosphere is not even really that scary, even compared to things like Forbidden Journey's spider scene. Heck, the main villain is quote-unquote killed by a beam of light. There's one scene where a bunch of wooden plates are falling in front of Dracula, and he's dashing through them to get to you, and I thought he was going to get brutally impaled by one of those because they look like wooden stakes. There were definitely opportunities like that to make this scarier, but I do scare easily, so I don't really mind. I think the ending is the one area where a more frightening end for the villain and more comedic end for Igor would have served the ride better. But that does it for the ride experience. Overall, I do love Monsters Unchained. It's not perfectly polished, and I can't say I like the ending, but it has great physical sets, fantastic animatronics, a creative take on a simple story, and memorable characters and dialogue. Most of you probably care more about those first two things and other technical elements, but I care about the story and writing stuff just as much, if not more. To me, great dark rides stand out not by being expensive, but by being creative. One of my favorite dark rides is Monster Mansion at Six Flags Over Georgia. It's got lots of animatronics and sets, but it's nowhere near as elaborate as most Universal rides. It's just a fun and atmospheric one with memorable characters and music. To further illustrate the reason I have this preference, one of my favorite moments on Harry Potter and the Forbidden Journey is the simple line, "We haven't lost anyone yet, not this week anyway." It's just fun and it gives the ride personality. And this ride, Monsters Unchained, deserves the praise it got for its technical elements, no doubt. But I think the characters and writing are underappreciated so far. Without the personality of our main characters, this would just be a display of half a dozen monsters vaguely getting close to the ride vehicle, and nothing else. The ride is made so much more fun by the strong script and voice acting in my opinion. So props to the writers and voice actors for making this ride go from an expensive and uneventful experience to one of the best dark rides I've ever been on. Now let's answer the question, is this the best dark ride I've done? My favorite currently, as I said, is Spider-Man at Islands of Adventure, and I think the similarities between these rides must be stated. They both have dynamic ride vehicles that spin around as you go on a perilous journey with a hero, protecting you from an assortment of enemies. Both rides also have fun dialogue and characters. I will give Monsters Unchained points for crafting an original character, and some new interpretations of old ones and doing so successfully. Also, it does have better physical sets than Spider-Man as a whole. However, while Spider-Man is heavily screen-based, it is not without great practical effects. The part where the gravity gun hits your vehicle and it looks like you're soaring above the buildings is accomplished mainly with practical sets, and in my opinion, it is the single best moment on any dark ride I've done. The ride makes you feel like you're part of the action in a way that most rides, including Monsters Unchained, don't really do. I also just find Spider-Man's writing even more funny and quotable than Monsters, but that could change with time. So I have to say, I still prefer Spider-Man for being just as technically impressive, but also remaining the pinnacle of great storytelling on dark rides. Either way, Monsters Unchained is still way up there on my list of favorite dark rides. To end this review, I will be giving the ride a number score out of 10. A 1 means it is among the absolute worst of Universal attractions, such as Fast and Furious Supercharged. A 10 means it is among the absolute best of Universal attractions, such as Velocicoaster or Spider-Man. Those scores are just my opinion, as is a score for Monster Unchained. I will be giving the ride a 9 out of 10. It's not quite the perfect 10 that Spider-Man is to me, but it's among Universal's absolute best rides, and you'll likely enjoy it even more than I did. For the 6th video in this series, I am reviewing Curse of the Werewolf, a Mock Rides family spinning coaster in the Dark Universe area of the park. Spoilers incoming. My last 2 reviews were of Stardust Racers and Monsters Unchained, 2 of my favorite Epic Universe rides. This review will be breaking that positivity cycle. In all honesty, I did not care for Curse of the Werewolf. I have established in other reviews that I prefer roller coasters to any other type of ride, so I went in expecting a pretty fun time on this. Unfortunately, I came off quite disappointed. This ride is not necessarily bad, but the more I think about it, the more I realize that Curse of the Werewolf fails at nearly everything it tries to do. So in this review, I will talk about my experience in the ride, and explain why regardless of your preference for roller coasters, theming, or anything else, you should lower your expectations for this ride. Let's start with the entrance experience. Walking up to this coaster, you'll likely find it to be the least impressive of the Epic Universe coasters, but it's still fine by most amusement park standards. I like how close the first overbank turn gets to the main path, and that first launch and final hill going over the path are pretty fun to see. The main issue here is the nets. This ride is very compact and close to the main walkway, so there are enormous nets on either side of the track at practically all times. This was not something I had really thought about while riding, but while observing the coaster from the main path, they definitely make the ride less visually appealing. Additionally, the nets are so tall that you can see them from Celestial Park before you even approach Dark Universe. I'm intrigued by the nets being so grand and obstructive. Hiccup's Wing Gliders also has nets, but they are much smaller and they don't extend above the track. They're also mildly themed, having a bit of a dragon wing pattern to them, so I want to know if these nets were added due to legal requirements, or if the park intentionally chose to add them. I don't think they ruined the ride's appearance, but this might be the only roller coaster I've done with its excessive level of netting. Maybe they're trying to catch a werewolf. Anyway, next up is the queue, and I kind of dislike it. The appearance is not bad in a vacuum. The muted colors are stylish enough, and I enjoy the cart structure with that wolf bust on it at the very start. In the queue, you have some details that help you understand that these tents belong to fortune tellers or similar, and that's done okay. It's definitely the least interesting queue in the park in my opinion though, even disregarding my issues with the theme itself. If this queue was at a Busch Gardens park, it wouldn't be anywhere close to the best. And those parks have way less money behind them. In fact, Busch Gardens Tampa already has a mock ride spinning coaster called Cobra's Curse. I'll be drawing many comparisons between these two rides throughout the review, but let's start with their queues. Cobra's Curse's queue is better, not only for the aesthetics and atmosphere, but also how well it fits in the theme land, and how well its story is presented. In terms of fitting in the land, Cobra's Curse is in the Egypt area of the park. It's surrounded by ruins, and the Snake King statue and elaborate excavation site themed queue fit super well. It works thematically and looks great. Curse of the Werewolf's queue looks fine, but its color palette and architecture feel out of place in Darkmoor. Other major structures here include an enormous castle and a flaming windmill, both having consistently dark colors and elaborate architecture. Werewolf's loading platform and props at the entrance sign feel at home in Darkmoor, but the rest of it seems off. It looks like a rundown circus, which leads into the other major issue with the queue. Cobra's Curse tells a story within the queue in a much better way than Werewolf. The architecture of Cobra's Curse clearly resembles an Egyptian tomb, and the props and signs indicate that the tomb is being excavated. There are also signs made to look like notes stuck on the tomb, explaining how a curse was awoken and the villainous Snake King has returned. If that's not enough, there's a room with a sort of animated pre-show, showing how Egyptians worshipped the Snake King in the past, but when they asked for more resources, he lashed out and killed them. Now, he's back. This story is simple, but the queue clearly paints a connection between the Snake King and the excavation site. It is clear that the Snake King returned because of excavators disturbing the tomb. We are riding in excavation vehicles, and things go awry when the Snake King attacks. That makes sense, and good queues should be able to draw a connection between the ride's main villain and the reason the riders are there in the first place. Monsters Unchained does the same thing. It's clear based on the queue and pre-show that Victoria is trying to control the monsters and we're there to see it live. It makes sense, and everything in the queue points to the story being about capturing monsters. Curse of the Werewolf fails in this regard because the whole time while I was in the queue, I was asking myself, what does this have to do with werewolves? There are some werewolf features here. I mentioned that bust at the start, and the screen showing a full moon above the loading station does give a good indication about werewolves being active, but everything else seems unrelated. Initially, I thought this theme was a circus, and maybe in most Universal stuff the werewolf is at a circus and escapes, and I thought maybe that's what was going on. That thought didn't change until I saw the fortune-telling cards on one table. Even once I saw those, I don't recall seeing the Mystics, which is the term for the fortune-tellers in this ride, ever being mentioned by name, and I didn't know they were called that until I saw a review of the ride later that day. On Cobra's Curse, the name of the excavation company is all over the queue. There's no confusion on that ride, and the detail of the excavation company name is way less important than the name of the fortune tellers. The reason for that is that without knowledge of the fortune tellers, I have no idea why they are even here. What is their connection to the werewolf, and why is there nothing in the queue to show their connection? There is some storytelling that clears this up a bit on the ride, but that's an issue I'll talk about later. Personally, given how confusing and tonally clashing this mystic theme is, I wish the ride was themed to entering an abandoned house in the forest of Darkmoor and encountering a werewolf there. The loading platform looks like it could have been that theme with no changes, and I do like its design a lot. However, it creates one more small issue for the queue. It's a nitpick and I only just now thought of it, but why did the Mystics set up temporary tents right outside of a permanent shack? That seems kinda weird to me. But that is the one complaint that's small enough to not influence my opinion of the queue. Overall, while the Mystics might be a known thing for Universal Monster fans, and therefore appeal to them, I think this queue is underwhelming for the average Universal fan that likes theming, and is nonsensical and uninspired for pretty much any park goer. There's clearly supposed to be a story and it just wasn't really told. But it is sort of told on the ride, so let's finally move on to the ride experience. This ride has been criticized for many reasons, and I have my own complaints to throw into the ring. This ride is a compact spinning coaster that begins with a launch, features a backwards section after you don't clear a turn, then you launch forward again, and you complete the layout. There are some theming elements in the middle, and it ends with a scene with the mystic leader, Maleva. That's about it for what happens, so let's talk about the issues. First, I will offer a bit of positivity in this review, as I address two of the ride's biggest criticisms that I actually disagree with. The first is that the ride is short in duration. Objectively, that's true. The whole thing is over in just about a minute. However, I don't think the ride feels like it's over too quickly. The ride clearly was fit into a very, very small area, and I think they got about as much mileage out of that as they possibly could. Props to the designers for that. Additionally, The show scene with the backwards gimmick helps extend the ride's duration in a very fun way. This scene is without a doubt the highlight of the ride for me. It's not thrilling, but it's the kind of amusement I expect from a family coaster like this. The theme shack has gotten flack for being underwhelming in appearance and having somewhat poor presentation of the werewolf statues. Many say they don't actually see the werewolves while on the ride, so if you want to see them, here's my tip. There are 2 werewolves, and each one is above either entrance of the shack from the track perspective. If you look above the track where you came from or where you're going, that is where you'll see the werewolves. I saw one werewolf as the train was going backwards, and the other as the train was finally clearing the turn. I like that there are werewolves on either side, so you're more likely to see them. Additionally, since you probably will only see one wolf at a time, you can pretend there's only one there and he's just jumping from side to side to mess with you and get multiple scares. The audio cues you enter the house each time is a lot of fun, and I think this whole scene is done alright. Its theme at least makes sense for a werewolf ride, and I do kind of have a blast during this section. Others might not, but I actually do like it. So that's it for compliments. I now have 2 other major complaints that I must bring up. The first one you might have already heard about, and that is that the ride does not spin much. This is not a guaranteed issue. I know Poseidon Entertainment mentioned getting plenty of spinning on the ride, and he even gave the ride a positive review because of the spinning. It's about the weight distribution, and I guess my ride was just not distributed right because I didn't get much spinning at all. There was some spinning, but in my experience, a spinning coaster with a little spinning is the perfect storm of awfulness. It's just enough that you can't actually feel the wind in your face or the forces of the ride, but it's also too little for the spinning to be disorienting or fun. The result is a very boring roller coaster experience, only made worse by the track layout. I think this layout is just not built right for a spinning coaster. Let's talk about another spinning coaster. The Pandemonium clones at Six Flags parks, made by Gerstlauer. These are less themed than Curse of the Werewolf, and they don't have any launches or backward stuff, but they have much tighter turns and smaller ride vehicles, lending themselves to far more intense spinning. I found myself spinning on the final brake run like crazy for an extended period on these rides, and I would take any Six Flags spinning coaster over Curse of the Werewolf for that reason. Granted, Cobra's Curse definitely spins less than the Gerstlauer ones, and it is by the same manufacturer as Curse of the Werewolf. So Cobra's Curse does not necessarily have a better spinning coaster layout, but it has a much better family coaster layout. The ride begins with an elevator lift like you're on a tour of the excavation site to see that Snake King statue. Then there's a fully forward section, then a backward section, then the final spinning section. The spinning section is quite similar to Curse of the Werewolf in terms of thrill, but it feels so much faster and way more fun. This section is mostly overbanked turns, like Werewolf, but the train dives underground into somewhat themed tunnels, soars over the path, and it just helps elevate it from being a below average spinning coaster to one of the top family spinners. The final section is also longer than the final section for Werewolf, and the full ride experience just feels so complete and enjoyable through and through. Also, I definitely get more spinning in general on Cobra's Curse, but that could be luck. What's not luck is Cobra's Curse having a better layout, better theming, and finally, a better ending. Cobra's Curse has a completely unthemed ending area with a speaker that says, "There is no escape from the Cobra's Curse." That's technically not a great ending, but it's somehow way better than Curse of the Werewolves. At that point of that ride, you pull up to a large poster that does not fit with the rugged, old-fashioned vibe of the shack and queue at all. A bunch of random crates and lanterns sit around, and a mannequin of the not even really character Maleva is also there. There's a speaker next to her that doesn't say anything, and you just kind of sit there looking at the garish theming until you exit the ride. This sorry theming is somehow sadder than the unthemed Cobra's Curse ending, really proving that doing a job halfway can be worse than not doing it at all. But you know what the funniest part is? I mentioned that the speaker next to Maleva doesn't work. Well, I learned from POVs that it is actually supposed to say something. On my ride, it didn't happen, despite literally being a speaker with no other moving part to be in sync with. But there should be audio at the start and end of the ride. At the start, she says something on the lines of "Beware, the werewolf is on the prowl," and at the end she says, "You've been bitten! The moon is no longer your friend." There is music playing for the second part, and I actually did hear the music. So how is there music playing but not the dialogue? What I liked most about the speaker not working for me though, is that Maleva didn't say anything, and I can assume that I was not bitten and therefore survived the ride. That's awesome for me. But man, the one moment that connects the mystics to the werewolves was not present on my ride, and that's ridiculous. Additionally, in my Monsters Unchained review I praised the voice acting that gave the attraction so much life, and I unfortunately can't do that here. The way her lines are spoken, they sound as if every word was done in a different take. It's unnatural, kind of like this entire ending room. But fortunately, that is the end of Curse of the Werewolf. Overall, you probably think I hate this ride after all that stuff I said. But I don't. It's just a mediocre spinning coaster with a fun gimmick in the middle of the ride. The reason I'm so hard on it, especially the theming, is that Universal is renowned for taking well-known ride models and adding creative flair that makes the experience far more memorable and unique to Universal. Their rides often have great hues, engaging stories, and stunning appearances to make them stand out. Even the less talked about rides like Dragon Racers Rally at Epic Universe do a good job of making a clone ride model feel at home at a Universal park. This ride just doesn't feel right at all, save for that middle scene with the werewolf. Cobra's Curse is a better ride in every way, unless you get lucky with the spinning on Curse of the Werewolf. This is not the worst ride at Epic Universe, but it's so frustrating that the things that could have made the ride stand out from other spinning coasters were so poorly done, if done at all. I know plenty of people had a fun time on this ride, so maybe the spinning is generally a lot better than what I experienced. If I got great spinning, I'd definitely like the ride a lot more, and I'd probably be less hard on it. However, no matter how good the spinning is, the ride still fails as a themed experience from start to finish, and is frankly one of the biggest misfires I've seen at Universal in a long while. To end this review, I will be giving the ride a number score out of 10. A 1 means it is among the absolute worst of Universal attractions like Fast and Furious Supercharged, a 10 means it is among the absolute best of Universal attractions such as Velocicoaster or Spider-Man. Those scores are just my opinion, as is a score for Curse of the Werewolf. Because it is still a fine family coaster and has moments I enjoy, I was considering giving it a 6 out of 10. However, the more I think about the way the ride is presented, the more I realize there are things I dislike about the ride that counteract the things I especially enjoyed. For that reason, I am giving Curse of the Werewolf a 5 out of 10. If you enjoy the ride, good for you, I'm really happy you do. There are definitely worse rides in the park, but there are none I dislike as much as this one. At the very least, its flawed nature makes it a lot of fun to talk about. For the 7th video in this series, I am reviewing Yoshi's Adventure. Spoilers incoming. This is an Omni-Mover dark ride in the Super Nintendo World area of the park. This is definitely one of the least talked about rides at Epic Universe, but I have seen mixed reviews. Some think it's a very simple but fun ride, even calling it the best ride in Nintendo World. Others call it the worst ride in the whole park. Which side am I on? Let's talk through the whole experience to see. First, the entrance experience. To get to this ride, you must enter Super Nintendo World. There are wheelchair accessible ways in, but the main path is an escalator designed to literally in a warp pipe like in the Mario games. Once you exit the pipe, you are on the upper level of the most beautiful land at the park, maybe any park, in my opinion. There's so much going on, and even though there's not much walking space, the land feels so grand. As you look out to the rest of the area, you can see Yoshi's moving along the track across from you. You can also see the entrance directly in front of you but on the lower level. So that is where you go to board the ride. This ride's entrance also has a warp pipe design, and once you enter it, you are in a very lovely indoor queue. The queue is air conditioned, which many will appreciate on summer days, and it looks very nice. There are trees, presents, and props galore, including some interactive features if you purchase a power band for something like $40. I would never do that, but if you have young kids who want the band, they can use it to trigger responses from certain props and earn points or something like that. Even though this is an indoor queue, these sets are very elaborate and it really does feel like a forest. Another enjoyable element of the main queue is the music. Throughout the whole area, you can hear a playlist of Mario tracks, mostly from Yoshi's Island and other games with Yoshi if I'm not mistaken. I at least recognize the main Yoshi's Island theme, known as Flower Garden. That was my favorite track in this queue. I must note, this queue is not perfect. If the line is lengthy enough, you will be corralled into the extended outdoor queue. This area straight up sends you into the back lot. There is a nice mural painted on the one wall, but it doesn't hide the fact that there's clearly a garage in view. They also had 3 fake hedges set up at the back walkway, kind of obscuring a view of the outside world with hotels and all. If you like immersion, you will hate this part of the queue. However, I thought it was kinda cool to have a brief break from the Nintendo-themed world, and remember how awesome it is that they fit so much stuff into a small area, surrounded by unthemed things. I also liked the sort of sneak peek you get of Minecart Madness from this area. Anyway, there are also screens in the queue where Toadette speaks, something I did not know that character could do, and explains that you're trying to find the golden egg. You do so by finding 3 other eggs and also finding Captain Toad. I think you maybe link your findings to the power band if you have it, but admittedly I was not really writing this with the whole golden egg quest in mind. A good story can enhance a ride experience, especially a roller coaster or major dark ride, but I think a scenic, slow omni-mover like this doesn't really need much story. It's not super well executed, but the goal of finding the eggs is clearly articulated, so once you climb the stairs in the treehouse, you reach the loading platform, see some of Captain Toad's stuff, board a Yoshi, and begin the ride. The queue is a very pleasant start, setting the tone for the rest of the ride quite nicely. As for the ride itself, it is a slow, 5-minute journey around a section of the Nintendo world. Once you leave the station, there are 3 distinct areas you visit, each with one of the 3 eggs. You click a button on your lap bar as you see each egg, and while the scavenger hunt's easy, it is satisfying and fun. The 3 main areas are as follows: an outdoor one overlooking Nintendo World with simple sets and some fun moving figures of Mario enemies such as Conkdor, an indoor section with Kamek and Baby Mario to reference the game Yoshi's Island, and another outdoor section with both jungle and desert features where we see more Mario enemies, some Baby Yoshis, and Captain Toad. My favorite part of this ride is the sets and the Mario character figures. Like most of Nintendo World, they really do look straight out of the games. The Yoshi cars you're in look perfect. Certain enemies like Pokey are so much fun to watch, and most of the sets feel very grand and full of action, even though they are somewhat small. There are a lot of figures on the ride, and they all look fantastic. It reminds me of Monster Mansion at Six Flags Over Georgia, which has so many monster animatronics that really keep you engaged and looking all around. Admittedly, this is not the most immersive of Epic Universe rides. You can clearly see some of the mechanisms that move the characters, but that's mostly a very minor complaint. I will also note that the indoor section is probably my least favorite of the 3. Some will find it a relief from the heat, and I love seeing Poochie, but the main actions that are in this scene involve Kamek flying around, a major villain from the Mario games, but he's just kind of gone in the next scene. I know the ride is meant to be relaxing and aimless, so I don't need to put that much thought into his inclusion, but I think it would make more sense if the ride didn't feature a major villain and never went beyond some standard Mario enemies like Pokey. Still, the scenes all look nice, and like the queue, there's great music. Captain Toad's theme in the final scene is a personal favorite of mine, and I'm a big fan of its use here. I also appreciate how much of the last scene is hidden from the main path, so you do have to ride if you want to see Captain Toad. I think it's worth it just for that, especially if you're a Mario fan. After this, the ride ends. Overall, this is not the most impressive ride in the park. I find it a lot more impressive than some screen-based rides at Universal Studios, but it is a very standard slow-moving ride with a bunch of characters that only move a little. One could liken it to It's a Small World, though this definitely is much better art design and music than that one. It is a pretty simple, pleasant adventure through one of the best-looking areas in any US theme park. I have seen some complain about the existence of a slow-moving ride that's mostly outdoors in the Florida sun, but I don't really mind. Maybe I'm just used to the heat. But I was thinking about what was going on around me as opposed to the temperature, so I enjoyed the ride, no sweat. It's definitely a fun experience as a whole. To end this review, I will be giving the ride a number score out of 10. A 1 means it is among the absolute worst of Universal attractions, such as Fast and Furious Supercharged. A 10 means it is among the absolute best of Universal attractions, such as Velocicoaster or Spider-Man. Those scores are just my opinion, as is the score for Yoshi's Adventure. For Yoshi's Adventure's final score, I will give it a solid 6 out of 10. It doesn't have any mind-blowing moments, even compared to some of the things you can see just from the main path in Super Nintendo World, but it's a very enjoyable experience nonetheless. For the 8th video in this series, I am reviewing Minecart Madness. Spoilers incoming. This is a roller coaster using the new boom arm technology that allows riders to sit in a vehicle that's held way above the track. Why is it like that? So the park can build fake track just below where you sit, and make the car look like it's actually jumping over missing track pieces. It's a unique experience save for the original Japan version, and I went in super excited for this. Honestly, I thought it'd be one of my favorite rides in the park, but then I heard what others were saying and I was a little nervous. The reception was very mixed, but now that I've ridden it, I can confidently say it is indeed one of the best rides in the park. It's a blast, and I disagree with many of the criticisms the ride got. Let's talk through the whole experience and see what makes Minecart Madness so great. First, the entrance experience. This beginning illustrates one great strength and one great flaw for this ride. The strength is the appearance. This is one of the most beautiful roller coaster presentations I've ever seen, and that's saying something. The Golden Temple looks so grand, maybe more so than any other structure in Super Nintendo World. The entire Donkey Kong Country area is surrounded by the roller coaster and its many environments, such as the temple, the ruins, and the water feature. The totems and plants you see along the way are also very well designed, and minecarts are constantly flying through the area when the ride is open. The carts even have spinning wheels and headlights, really selling the idea that they're riding on that minecart track, even though they never actually touch it. It's so photogenic. Generally, I do prefer roller coasters where you can see more of the actual ride as it travels through a beautiful setting like Nemesis Reborn at Alton Towers, but still, this is among the very best looking theme park attractions I know of. Once you reach the entrance, you will observe one of the ride's most widely acknowledged flaws, the wait time. Wait time does not influence my opinion on the ride, so I am somewhat surprised that so many reviews brought it up as a major thing. But, to be fair, the ride does consistently have one of the longest waits at Epic Universe. I got online 15 minutes after it opened for the day following a 4-hour delay in operations, and I waited 65 minutes. That may not sound horrible. Other rides had 2-hour waits that day, and Harry Potter can reach a 5-hour wait at times. But my 65-minute wait was lucky. The wait time quickly climbed to 2 hours when I was in line, and it stayed pretty high for the remainder of the day. If you have early entry, you might want to do this one first. I've heard bad things about the single rider line in terms of how it moves, so if you can't do this before the line fills up, you're just gonna have to stick out a long wait. Personally, I think it's worth it. While I said wait time does not affect my thoughts on the ride, it does affect my likelihood of re-riding it. Honestly, I think this ride is worth that wait in general. Even on re-rides. If every ride at Epic Universe had the same wait time, this would be one of my very first choices to get in line for. Heck, if Minecart Madness had an extra 45-minute wait compared to Dragon Racers Rally or even Curse of the Werewolf, I'd go for Minecart Madness for sure. I think it's a very fun ride, and I'd be willing to wait in the queue for an hour or two again, just to get on that if I went back to Epic Universe. However, many would disagree with that because of another issue people have with the ride, the queue. Minecart Madness does not have the most elaborately themed queue out there. Some even say it's the worst in the park. I assume those people did not ride Curse of the Werewolf, but either way, it doesn't have as much stuff to hold your attention as most other queues, especially when that wait is long. The first outdoor portion that you'll likely spend time in since the line's often backed up to there is enjoyable. You're surrounded by a section of the ride, and it looks great as you watch the cars pass by. It's dynamic and enjoyable, a good start to the queue overall. Next, you enter a narrow hallway painted gold, indicating you're in the temple. This is where people start to complain. The rooms in this temple are very bare bones, containing little of note up until the large room, which only features a few things. I do love the things the room has though. There's an interactive element for those with the power band, you can make a banana light up on the ceiling, and I believe the thing it does is tied to how many points you have. There's also paintings on the wall, designed to look ancient, and they're quite a lot of fun. One shows worshippers of the golden banana, helping riders understand the ride's story and the main thing you're looking for. The other resembles the original Donkey Kong arcade game. Even if you don't know the Donkey Kong Country games, you'll probably recognize this. For those who do know the Nintendo stuff, there are some Pikmin getting crushed by a barrel. After this room, there are animatronics of Cranky Kong and Squawks from the Donkey Kong Country games, and I think that's awesome. I didn't see them in action, so I wonder if Cranky only talks every once in a while, or if he just wasn't working at that time. Afterwards, you pass some vines and finally board the ride. This queue really does only have 4 or 5 notable theming elements plus views of the coaster. For me, that's enough. I won't say time flew by in this queue, but I enjoyed what it had, and I found waiting for Yoshi's Adventure, Curse of the Werewolf, and even Harry Potter and the Battle of the Ministry to be far less interesting experiences. Harry Potter's for another time though. I find the queue acceptable. It's far from the worst out there, and I wouldn't even call it worse in the park. It's just that you'll likely spend more time here than you might want to. Now to explore whether or not the ride is worth that wait in the apparently hated queue. Once you board your minecart, the song Gear Getaway begins. It is a perfect fit for the ride, having a jazzy sound that makes the ride feel lively and adventurous. The first scene, you pass an animatronic of Dixie Kong, which is nice as seeing more characters in the games is great. Then you climb the first hill at a pretty steady pace, and you enter a tunnel shaped like a barrel that replicates the barrels you launch out of in the games. Once you're there, you briefly speed up before slowing down again as the sound of you flying through the air plays. Once you reach the fake track in front of you, you hear an anvil sound to indicate you're back on track. I love this first jump and all the ones that follow it. You can see the fake track but not the real one, so while riding, I did kind of forget that we were way above the real track. That's a lot of fun. I obviously knew the track was fake that we were jumping on, but it really was easy to forget just what was actually happening. The pacing of the jumps and the added sound effects further enhance these moments, not to mention how beautiful the area is everywhere you look. I love how slowly you crest the hill, giving you a great view of the temple facade for an extended period. After this, there's a large indoor drop, a brief journey through the ruin area, an indoor section where your train quickly jumps from side to side, a second lift hill even closer to the temple, 2 more drops, a moderate splashdown, and a dark ride scene where you find the golden banana to finish it off. This experience is enjoyable through and through. It really sells that track jumping gimmick on the ride, save for the largest 2 drops. However, those 2 drops are very fast moments, so you don't linger on them long enough. By the time you realize you can see the real track, you're already back to jamming out to the song and exploring Donkey Kong Country. Another major critique the ride has gotten is that it is janky. Many of the stops and turns will shake you around, in part due to that arm that holds you up not being perfectly still. That might sound like a safety concern, but just so everybody knows, if there was no flexibility on that arm, it would be susceptible to snapping. So that shakiness is not going to go away for the sake of staying safe. Some won't enjoy the roughness, but it's not painful, and there was a member of my party who is notorious for a low roughness tolerance on roller coasters who loved this ride. It was their favorite in the park and they didn't mind the roughness at all. Besides, the abrupt turns are very much part of the theme, and the ride vehicle shaking as you go through these turns further sells the idea that you're really switching tracks. The ride's frequent brake runs and shakiness are similar to another Universal roller coaster, the soon-to-be-closed Hollywood Rip Ride Rocket. That ride has the same issues, but they actively make that ride less enjoyable, while I think Donkey Kong is not any worse for it. The reason is that Rip Ride Rocket is a large, thrilling roller coaster. It reaches speeds of 65 miles per hour, and when you constantly slow down, it kills the momentum. The shakiness, when I have experienced it, is also generally worse when you're going at a higher speed. Minecart Madness goes probably half the speed of Rip Ride Rocket, so the brake runs don't completely slow you down. Maybe the abrupt stops following the large 2 drops are a little weird, but the slower parts of the ride are some of the most fun to me, as I do enjoy the scenery, and honestly, the scenic parts are just as much fun if not more so than the thrilling ones. I also find the mix of indoor and outdoor scenes to be very well done here. It really does feel like you're entering a new level or some sort, and it's very well paced each time you're in those dark ride sections. They're not super fast, and they don't feel like they're over too quickly. This ride's pacing is nothing like the other roller coasters in the park, but the ride is going for something completely different. I'd say it succeeds. It's well themed, moderately thrilling, and captures an equal amount of fun as Hiccup's wing gliders, but with an atmosphere of its own. Nearly every scene is executed perfectly, but I do have one nitpick on that execution when it comes to the gimmick. That is during the second big drop. At this point, the fake track twists above you because of some villain, and you fall and then land on another fake track. This part happens fast enough that I didn't really realize what was happening in the scene as I rode. I knew I was jumping to a new track, but I didn't really notice the track twisting up to the ceiling because of how quickly we went by. Otherwise, I think the entire gimmick is successful, and the ride is just as fun as any other attraction at Epic Universe. Overall, Minecart Madness is definitely one of the best attractions at the park in my opinion. Visually, it's top-notch. The pacing is unique but great. The ride pulls off a first-of-its-kind experience as a roller coaster, save for the Japan duplicate, and the vibe of the ride is fun regardless of your knowledge of Donkey Kong. I'd be surprised if there were people who rode this and didn't enjoy the music, the visuals, or the gimmick, even if they didn't really know who Donkey Kong was. Many have deemed this ride a one and done, mainly due to it being a challenge to get on. And I do understand that, but based on the fun factor, this is 100% in my top 5 of the park, and based on the theming only, it might be even higher. Small moments do break the immersion, but no moments stop this from being a fun time. This is a must for Donkey Kong fans, and if you're not one, give the ride a chance. It just might surprise you. To end this review, I will be giving the ride a number score out of 10. A 1 means it is among the absolute worst of Universal attractions, such as Fast and Furious Supercharged. A 10 means it is among the absolute best of Universal attractions, such as Velocicoaster or Spider-Man. Those scores are just my opinion, as is a score for Minecart Madness. I will be giving Minecart Madness a very strong 8 out of 10. The visuals would be a 10, and the gimmick execution could probably be a 9. But the ride is not significantly more fun than some of the other best rides at the park, so I can't quite give it a higher score. Still, it's a high-tier Epic Universe ride in my opinion, and I'm very, very happy I got to experience it. For the 9th video in this series, I am reviewing Mario Kart Bowser's Challenge. This dark ride is the one Epic Universe attraction that existed way before the park opened. Universal Japan got its own version in early 2021, and Universal Hollywood has had one since 2023. This ride, like the other Nintendo attractions, has received mixed reviews. Some love it, others call it mediocre. I definitely lean toward the former, but I'd be lying if I said everything the ride tries to pull off works perfectly. So let's talk about the full experience and find out why this ride is great, but not really the best at Epic Universe. First, the entrance experience. The ride is a minor issue that the other dark rides here also have. It might be with the goal of immersing riders in the world that's not a theme park, but there's not a huge entrance sign with the name on it. Like the other two dark rides at the park, the entrance building is pretty grand, so if you know what you're looking for, you'll have no trouble finding the ride. However, if you enter Super Nintendo World and look around with no knowledge of the park layout or knowledge of Mario, you may struggle to find the ride. So I'll tell you right now, the ride is housed in Bowser's Castle on the upper level. Once you escalator your way into the land, it is on your left and you'll recognize that large dark color castle. You can also use the park map, which might help, but it can be confusing because that park map is aerial and the Nintendo World is 2 stories. Anyway, there is a small sign with the ride's name to help you confirm you're in the right place next to the castle. And once you're at Bowser's Castle, you can enter to get in line for the ride. On my one ride on this, I used the single rider line, and it did actually save me a lot of time. I got a bit lucky, there were only 30 or so people in front of me in total, so I waited 25 minutes when the main line today posted 75-minute wait. This will not work out for everyone. I've heard mixed reviews of the Mario Kart Bowser's Challenge single rider line. But if you're in a hurry, it might be worth trying it if that first leg of the single rider line only has a few people, if any. I later got back in line and I got to see a good portion of the main queue before the ride broke down. This queue might be the best one in the park. Its style is not the realistic one of Monsters or Ministry, but that might make it even better. It replicates the Mario style beautifully. My familiarity with Mario might help, but I think most people are familiar with Mario, so it should help with a lot of you. The queue begins with a grand statue of Bowser that anyone can enjoy. You can also see it from the single rider line. There are numerous rooms such as the MKTV News Truck Room, a Bob-omb Factory, and Bowser's Library. The library has so many fun titles in the books, you could probably read a full book in the time you could read all these titles. There are also screens in here with the ghosts in the Mario games, known as boos, messing around and giving the ride, ironically, more life. After all these rooms, you are sent down some stairs to get to the loading platform, because you started on the upper level of Nintendo World and the dark ride is actually built below. The last room before this displays some racing uniforms, and also large screens that explain the gameplay. Some of you may now be asking, what gameplay? Well, in addition to being a standard slow-moving dark ride, Mario Kart uses augmented reality glasses so you can see the Mario characters racing alongside you. These glasses and the controls on the steering wheel turn this into a shooting dark ride, where you can compete with other riders and try to get a high score. My biggest issue with this ride is that the competitive part feels very disconnected from the scenic dark ride part. I'm generally glad it exists, but the two things just don't mesh together well. If you've seen POVs, including the AR that is, you've seen that the Mario characters don't really look like they're actually on the track in front of you. It's not much better on the actual ride. So for the rest of this review, I will talk about the gameplay and main dark ride separately. For the gameplay, you grab a plastic Mario hat visor before going downstairs. Once you're in your car, you grab the AR glasses from there and slide them on the visor. Sliding them on may be tricky for some, it did take me 2 tries to get them off at the end. Also, I was surprised the glasses were in the car and not just with the hats, but I suppose they can be delicate. The first part of the dark ride has screens reiterating how the gameplay works. There are 2 key elements of gameplay that can earn you coins, those being steering and shooting enemies. The steering is simple, but it's executed quite flawlessly and a very welcome addition to the ride. The way it works is that a left or right arrow will appear before the car makes a turn. If you turn your steering wheel the correct direction, the arrow lights up and I believe you get coins. Those are the point system. I wasn't really looking at my score all that frequently, but I think it's great that you can turn the steering wheel, and it makes you feel like you're playing a role in where the ride goes. The ride is on a set track, so you don't actually turn the car the other way at any point, but it's a ton of fun, and it doesn't distract from the sets around you. If that was the only AR feature, it might have seemed like an underwhelming use of the technology, but I also think the ride may have been perfect that way. The shooting part of the gameplay is a lot more rough. So the way this works is that you sometimes collect Koopa shells, and you can launch these at the characters in the AR, looking at them to aim, and pressing both buttons on the steering wheel to shoot. The both button thing is weird to me. If you play video games, including Mario Kart, you know that shooting a basic item should only take one button. I thought each button would do a different thing, and maybe you got two different kinds of power-ups. But no, it's something to get used to that you have to press both buttons, but it's not a huge deal. Just a little weird. The shooting works fine, I was able to hit who I aimed at least 20% of the time, but it was unclear whether or not shooting the good guys made you gain or lose points. I don't think the queue says anything about that, and I definitely hit some Team Mario people. Still, having a shooting dark ride element here is a lot of fun. However, your opportunities to shoot seem a little bit off. On some POVs I saw, there was way more going on in the augmented reality than what I experienced. Maybe I wasn't looking hard enough, but there were major enemies in POVs that I never saw on my ride. And I know for a fact my screen never got inked. There is this squid equivalent called Blooper that inks the screen in many POVs. That 100% did not happen to me. It could have been my fault, but it felt like other POVs just had more going on and therefore more chances to hit enemies and earn points. This AR aspect just is not as intuitive as maybe Universal thought. It's not explained in the queue all that well, and the fact that you can see racers and enemies by looking around, I don't think is ever mentioned. Granted, kids who are good with video games, which are probably most of them at this point, will likely figure things out on their own, and if they don't, that just makes this all the more re-rideable. Honestly, I'm somewhat glad the AR didn't seem that active and overloaded on my ride, because it could have distracted from these sets. My favorite thing about this. So let's talk through the actual ride. After the instructional video I mentioned, which I sat at for quite a while, your car and another one pull up to a screen, and that is where the race begins. Once you get the green light, the AR racers zoom ahead, an animation on the screen in front of you makes it look like you're moving very fast, and the vehicle shakes around to sell the idea that you're actually racing. This is a great start. It's pulled off quite well, save for the racers not quite aligning with the screen. After this, you explore several environments based on Mario Kart tracks. There's stuff in the AR, but for the most part I'm just going to focus on the actual scenes here. I don't really know the names of all these Mario Kart tracks, so bear with me as I use Wikipedia to figure this out. The start of the race is on Royal Raceway, and then you enter Piranha Plant Slide. There are piranha plants here, also some chain chomps, and the piranha plants actually open their mouths as fireballs appear on the AR according to some POVs. That is a great mix of the practical sets and the AR animation. Next up is Dolphin Shoals, an underwater area that's sold pretty well thanks to bubbles appearing on the AR, and it all looks great thanks to the beautiful rockwork. There are some large underwater enemies on screens amidst the sets, and I find this area the least eventful even with those giant enemies. Still, it is pleasant. Next up is Twisted Mansion, a gorgeous set, with swinging chandeliers that I think look awesome. You will see some of the boos in here, including King Boo. And this room feels like it's done faster than the others, but it still is a very enjoyable one, and it leads into my personal favorite. Cloud Top Cruise is the most atmospheric of the major rooms. It's brightly lit, and it almost sells the idea that you're not indoors. There's also a breeze in the room to really sell the idea that you're up in the sky. There's also some enemies that appear on screens, but because of the clouds covering the screens more and the fact that the screen looks like a sky more than water, it's a lot more convincing, and I kinda thought it was not a screen at first. It's an awesome room overall, I really love being in it. But then the clouds get darker and you approach Grumble Volcano. This is my least favorite scene on the ride. These sets are not bad at all. They might even be the best in a way. But the final boss fight here is not a moment I enjoy. There's a huge lava Bowser, and I could see cars in front of me fighting it and blow it up. Then it just kind of reappeared once I got up to it. I also found that I could not hit him with the shells, or if I could, they didn't do anything for my point total. I have to admit, I really dislike the trope of shooting dark rides having a final enemy that you can't do anything to, and they end up getting beaten by just something random that you have nothing to do with. However, I've seen POVs that seem to suggest that this Bowser can get hit by the shells, and maybe those riders were earning points. The POVs don't even seem that similar to the experience I got in general, especially in terms of the AR. But regardless of how the boss fight's supposed to go, the ride's ending is perfect. After fighting Lava Bowser, you spin around and enter a completely dark room for a split second. Then, Rainbow Road appears. Rainbow Road is the most famous Mario Kart stage, and its inclusion could not have been done better. For those who wanted a faster dark ride for Mario Kart, this moment will give you exactly what you wanted. Your car shakes around to once again indicate you're driving like crazy, the light pattern on the floor is beautiful and moves by so fast, the darkness surrounding the road sells the idea that you're on a road in space, and the AR has some motion graphics that make it seem like you're really speeding through the area. You also earn a superstar right before the section begins, meaning the upbeat superstar music from Mario begins playing. This moment is magical. It's what everybody who hates this ride before even riding it wanted, and it's a great use of both the AR and the physical environments. The two aspects blend together here, making this end one to remember. Then it's declared that a certain team wins. You are Team Mario, and Team Bowser is just kinda the general Bowser, it's not the other car or anything like that. Your car needs 100 coins total according to Wikipedia in order for Team Mario to win. That's not super tough to get, so I imagine Team Mario usually wins. I got 70 total on my own, which didn't seem great. It was nowhere close to the daily record of around 240. But still, going on again after a better understanding of how it all works is something I would have loved to do had the ride not broken down that night. Overall, Mario Kart Bowser's Challenge is a great ride. The AR is not perfect, and I think Minecart Madness is more successful with its gimmick than this one. But combining great sets with competition is a lot of fun. If they could somehow make this a conventional shooting dark ride with guns and targets with the same sets and all, this may have been the best dark ride ever. I'm not certain of that, and clearly the AR has its strengths. It does enhance multiple scenes, but I'm not entirely sure how to feel about this ride. I think while there are benefits to the gimmick of the AR, there are things it distracts from. Also, there seemed like a weird glitch at the end where 5 random characters were standing to the left above everything else, but that's just another funny thing I noticed, it doesn't really ruin the ride or anything. Some of you will love this ride, others will really dislike it. For me, while the AR execution holds back some scenes, it also does help create one of the best moments on any dark ride I've ever done. To end this review, I will be giving the ride a number score out of 10. A 1 means it is among the absolute worst of Universal attractions, such as Fast and Furious Supercharged. A 10 means it is among the absolute best of Universal attractions, such as Velocicoaster or Spider-Man. Those scores are just my opinion, as is the score for Mario Kart. I will be giving Mario Kart Bowser's Challenge an 8 out of 10. It isn't quite among my favorite rides in the park, but it's fun the whole way through and I admire its ambition. Maybe the next dark ride uses AR technology will get a 10 out of 10. For the 10th and penultimate video in this series, I am reviewing Constellation Carousel. Spoilers for the carousel incoming. I went to Epic Universe expecting this to be my least favorite ride in the park, and I saved it for last as a result. I rode Battle the Ministry before, but I got stuck on the ride 10 seconds in, so I didn't complete that one till later. That's why I'm doing this one first. Fortunately, this ride does have some interesting elements, and I think it is a little more noteworthy than most carousels. There's not as much to talk about as usual, but let's jump right in anyway. Walking up to this ride immediately demonstrates its beautiful appearance. The ride's aesthetics fit Celestial Park well, and they're quite creative. I enjoy the design of the exterior, and that design does continue to the interior of the ride. The queue is entirely unthemed, but you can watch the carousel from the queue and that is very nice. The design of the carousel itself is not only beautiful, but also shows how unique the ride is compared to traditional carousels. First off, there are no horses. Instead, the animals are all based on constellations, such as Ursa Major, the Great Bear, and Aries, the Ram. I guess they intentionally left off horses even though Pegasus is a famous horse constellation, but the animals all look great, and this ride did teach me about the existence of a peacock constellation. Other unique elements of this include the mechanism for the carousel. The thing that moves the carousel up and down typically is connected to the ceiling and the floor. On this ride, it is not connected to the ceiling at all. The mechanisms are entirely under the base of the ride, leading to lots of extra theming opportunities. The rods sticking up from the animals have orbs on top of them resembling planets, and they change color throughout the ride. Additionally, the ceiling is very elaborately themed, with several moving parts meant to represent the Chronos to a certain degree. It all looks like different astro blades, and it is gorgeous. The appearance does help the ride stand above most of its kind. The other key thing that this carousel has above most others is the wait time. The capacity seems lower than some standard merry-go-rounds, due to having a more spacious base and therefore less animals. That said, the workers weren't exactly loading the carousel at top speed. A flat ride like this generally will take longer to check though, because instead of just going along a track like a roller coaster, checking each row at a time, these are all individual seats and you have to circumnavigate the entire thing to check every single seat. So unfortunately, the ride just can't load that fast. The line was about 25 minutes long for me despite only 3 cycles happening before mine, so we were averaging around 8-minute cycles, and when the ride itself is just 2 minutes, that means it took around 6 minutes to load. One thing that might help keep the weight down though, is that the animals can fit 2 people each. There are 2 seats, so if you have a party of 4, you can pair up and take just 2 animals instead of each taking your own and getting that up to 4. Most will take their own animals anyway, but I think it's more fun to ride with your friends and family, and I'm very happy I chose a double up. Now that we've discussed the waiting experience, we can talk about the ride. I saw 2 full ride cycles from a close distance before I actually rode, and then I rode the carousel for myself. This is how I learned about another feature that makes this ride both better and worse. Constellation Carousel has multiple programs. By that I mean, all 3 cycles I witnessed/experienced had different music and movement patterns for the animals. This is a great feature. It means the ride is more worth doing multiple times. If you can get a different experience each time, it's not as much of a one and done. However, there is a big issue I have with the existence of multiple programs. That being that the first one I saw is so much better than the other 2. The latter 2, including the one I experienced, had aimless movement patterns for the animals and very standard whimsical music. Not bad, but the first one I saw was freaking awesome. The music was jazzy and lively, and the ride moved like a normal carousel for the first half. Then the music died down a little bit, and you finally start going backwards like it's a big reveal. If I got that version for my ride, it would instantly be a top 2 carousel I've ever done, no doubt. Alas, I didn't get that one, so it's harder for me to judge. I do consider that version's existence in the overall thoughts, as I did see it happen, but I really wish the other versions were equally fun and memorable. It might also be nice if they cut out one of the whimsical ones, because those are far less distinguishable from each other, and giving people the opportunity to ride the best version by far would be a lot nicer. Then again, others may prefer that quiet, uplifting music to the epic party mode, so this could just be a me thing. Either way, it's time to talk about the experience I did get. The ride begins and the music is certainly nice. The animals can rotate 360 degrees, and they are on spinning platforms within the main spinning platform, allowing for even more variation in the movements. The spinning is gentle so you don't get dizzy from the ride, and I enjoy that when you spin around you can see the animals behind you. Most carousels you can't do that because, well, the animals are behind you, so you have to turn your head around. But here you get full 360 degree views of the entire carousel. The ride cycle is about 2.5 minutes, so not super long, but there's only so much a carousel one can do, so it makes sense it wouldn't be a super long cycle. What else can I say about this ride? It's a carousel. Carousels are fun, but they're not super fun. This one is slightly elevated by the extensive range of motion and sometimes its music. The main thing that really does set it apart is that appearance. However, it is still a carousel. Overall, I certainly like Constellation Carousel. I'm very happy the park has it, and it's probably the best of these standard flat rides in the entire resort in terms of how much it improves upon the original type. I do wish it was always as fun as that first cycle was though. That's why it's only my second favorite carousel. I prefer Cedar Downs at Cedar Point. That one sells the theme of a high energy horse race. This one sells a pleasant celestial theme, but the space party angle is so much more interesting to me, and the whimsical ride I actually got is just not as fun. However, I would love to experience the space party mode, so I suppose Universal did successfully make a carousel that's not a one-and-done ride. To end this review, I will be giving the ride a number score out of 10. A 1 means it is among the absolute worst of Universal attractions, such as Fast and Furious Supercharged. A 10 means it is among the absolute best, such as Velocicoaster or Spider-Man. Those scores are just my opinion, as is the score for Constellation Carousel. I will be giving Constellation Carousel a 5 out of 10. That might sound negative, it is technically below average, but when you look at other Universal attractions, this was not built to be a 10. If I was scoring based on only carousels, this would be a 9 out of 10 carousel. But next to the rest of Epic Universe's rides, this still falls pretty low. That said, I see people give it a 7 out of 10 if not higher, so you just might love this ride if you give it a chance. Hello everyone, it's Theme Park Avenue, I'm Eric. Welcome to Epic Universe Reviews, a series of videos reviewing each of the 11 rides of the all-new Universal's Epic Universe theme park at Universal Orlando Resort. In each video, I will talk through my experience on one of the rides, provide useful information about it, and give some final thoughts on how good the ride is. For the 11th and final video in this series, I'm reviewing the one, the only, Harry Potter and the Battle at the Ministry. Spoilers incoming. If you asked everybody who went to Epic Universe what their favorite ride is, I think the winner would for sure be this ride. Battle at the Ministry is already highly acclaimed, even being called the best theme park ride in the world by some. It is easy to see why people are so impressed by it. The technical aspects are some of the very best on any dark ride, and there are some mind-blowing moments. I'm not easily wowed by dark rides, but this ride definitely has some fantastic segments I greatly enjoyed, and I might consider them some of the best in any dark ride. However, the impressive elements can only take the ride so far, and I have a lot of issues with the experience that range from minor presentation elements to massive conceptual flaws that make the whole thing less interesting than it could have been. So in addition to a spoiler warning, I will be adding a Ministry fan trigger warning. If you already love the ride or you're watching a spoiler review but you're still hyped for the experience, you will likely find some of my critiques nitpicky and insignificant. That's fine. The things I dislike about a theme park ride should not influence how you feel about it. That said, I will now talk through the full ride experience and explain what I think makes the ride great and also what makes it fall short of excellence. I got online for this ride after getting on 9 of the 11 rides at the park, and I waited 2 hours. Once the ride began, I was super excited. Sadly, just as the action was about to begin, the ride shut down. I've discussed this experience before on my Epic Universe Guide video about getting everything in one day, but basically I got off 40 minutes later and I received a single-use express pass. I used it on this very ride about 2 hours later. So basically it was a reset, and the second attempt is my true Battle at the Ministry experience. Nothing on the first experience really influenced my opinion on the ride, but getting stuck was certainly a fun experience. Seeing behind the scenes is always awesome, but now, let's actually review the ride. The entrance experience has an issue I've mentioned before. There's not a huge sign with the ride's name on it outside of the entrance. If you know what the area looks like in advance, you'll be fine. But the building blends in with Wizarding Paris quite well, and the land is fairly expansive. You may struggle to find out where you're supposed to go at first, but I believe there are some small signs pointing you in the right direction, and there is a small sign with the ride's name right outside the entrance. This entrance thing does not take away from the ride for me at all, but I think others may prefer this system and like the ride even more for it. When there's no entrance sign, the ride doesn't feel like a ride as much. It feels like you're just entering a Wizarding World building, so you feel a little more immersed in the land. I don't feel that way at all because I know I'm at a theme park and immersion is not something that generally speaks to me. But I do get why they didn't make a huge sign. Once you actually enter, things kinda kick into high gear. The building is dubbed Metro Flu. For those who don't know, Flu powder is a magical substance in Harry Potter that when thrown into a fireplace, I believe, can teleport you to a location of your choice. I kinda thought Diagon Alley Universal Studios would use Flu powder, but I guess the foot traffic there is a bit too high. Ultimately, using it on this ride was very smart. The idea here is that you start in Paris and take the Metro Flu, a public transit system involving Flu powder, back to London's very own Ministry of Magic. I believe Metro Flu is original to this ride, and frankly, I find it brilliant. Walking through the tunnel as green smoke appears to obscure your view until you're in the Ministry is a great way to send you to a completely new location into the ride queue. The only issue is that the events of the ride take place 60 years after the films that the Wizarding Paris is based on. So technically you just teleported 60 years into the future while going through Flu powder. That's a weird quirk, but it's not something that really bothers me. I think you'd have to be a massive Potterhead to really get bothered by that. I should mention I'm not that knowledgeable on Harry Potter. I've read some of the books and that's it, but I know a few things and I will be giving that knowledge as we go throughout this. Anyway, you enter the Ministry of Magic in London, and this is perhaps one of the highlights of the whole experience. The main room in the Ministry is enormous in a way no other dark ride queue, or ride queue in general, as far as I know, is. The statues are grand. The ceiling is so high that a dragon couldn't bump its head on it. There are so many offices with props inside where they could have just closed the windows, but they went all out. It's gorgeous, and if you don't want to wait for the ride but want to see this room, the single rider line doubles as a Ministry viewing access point. You can walk through, enjoy the room, and exit the way every rider does. I took the single rider line on my first attempt, and I love how far you can walk in before you're actually corralled into line. At that point, it doesn't even feel like a waiting area. You just feel like you're walking through a really large lobby. In this lobby, there's also a poster of Dolores Umbridge, and it's through this poster that we learn that we are at the Ministry to see this character, who is a secondary antagonist from Harry Potter, stand trial following the death of Lord Voldemort. I suppose she aligned with his views or maybe tried to help him or something, but you can enjoy the ride without actually knowing what she did. You just have to know that she's the villain. I did know going in that she was a very hated character, and just the way she acts in the moving wanted poster gives you that idea quite nicely. She's instantly hateable, very easy to grasp just from this first room alone. Admittedly, I was concerned about Umbridge being the main villain. The previous Harry Potter dark ride, Escape from Gringotts, which is a roller coaster technically, had Voldemort himself as the villain. Umbridge seems more like a secondary antagonist. She's less intimidating and presumably less powerful. I'll talk about whether or not she works later on. So once you're in the Ministry, you'll likely pass through several rooms before getting on the ride. Let's talk about some of them. There's a rotunda with more offices that look quite nice, and they feature wanted posters of some other villains on this ride known as Death Eaters, a group that worship Voldemort or something like that. I will note, these wanted posters have a very annoying quirk, where they reset through hard cuts every time, and the different shots cut different times. I think if they were in sync, and maybe faded out together and then faded back in, kinda like Umbridge's big poster, it would look a lot better. Still, this room is nice otherwise. There's another room with some sort of moving mural, and that's pretty stylish, and another nearby detail in this room is one of my favorite parts of the whole queue. It's a poster listing prohibited items in the Ministry. It's not hats and phones like you might expect on a theme park ride. It's magical items from Harry Potter like invisibility cloaks. There's fun jokes on this sign, and most of them are pretty easy to understand even with minimal knowledge of the franchise. That's great. There are a few rooms with talking portraits similar to Forbidden Journey, and they're still decently fun, but I didn't really stick around long enough to hear what they said. Then there's an enormous waiting area you'll probably be in for a while. But you can enjoy what looks like a break room, where there's some weird looking stacks of cups, and a magical vacuum that was not working when I went. There's also a locker room with more Easter eggs, I'm sure, but not much to say there. The next part is beautiful, but I'm not entirely sure what it is. The green and purple tiles of the Ministry become pink, and everything is kind of a mess. I believe the room belonged to Umbridge. I mainly make that assumption because of the next room though, which contains an animatronic of Higgledy, Umbridge's former personal house elf. I didn't catch most of what she says, but I was enjoying the stellar architecture of this room, the many props, and the magic feather duster. After this, you pass some more wanted posters and reach the loading area. Before we talk about the loading experience, here are some final thoughts on the queue. I really like how non-linear it feels. The whole thing does seem like a large building you're just walking through. You could easily get lost among these rooms if there weren't constant switchbacks, and that's a very fun feeling. My biggest issue with the queue is that it may be too big for its own good, and has inconsistent levels of detail as a result. I don't want to be too hard on it, it probably is the greatest room of any queue ever built, but the room with the water cups feels very empty. This is most apparent compared to other major Harry Potter queues. Forbidden Journey takes you through Hogwarts Castle, and there's always something to look at. Gringotts also just seems to have more going on in general, and the more interesting rooms are the largest ones, whereas this one's second biggest room falls a bit flat. I think this queue seems a little less interesting than the other Harry Potter ones, just because the Ministry is a less interesting building in general. The walls are tile, there are very few pillars, and the most impressive statue doesn't come close to the chandeliers of Gringotts in my opinion. Ultimately, that's a nitpick, I don't factor in the queue design that much anyway, and at most amusement parks it doesn't matter at all to me. However, Universal aims to make their queues a part of the ride experience, and this is where I think the queue struggles most. Thinking about Gringotts, that ride's queue really does set up the story. Here, the queue feels kind of disconnected, because there's nothing that hints at the trial possibly going wrong. The conflict is kind of supposed to be a big shock as we get on. Everything we learn about in the queue is just Umbridge being on trial, an event that kind of just stops 20 seconds into the ride. Gringotts is also about going to a place where things end up going wrong, but that queue does set up the fact that Harry Potter is there and about to go on a big mission. That conflict is explained in the queue, not so much here. Maybe I missed it, but that is the reason why I think Gringotts overall is a superior queue. But that is enough queue talk. This is still one of the best queues out there. Let's talk about what really matters, the ride. Battle of the Ministry begins with you boarding this weird floating elevator that has 14 seats. Front row seats ideal, but you can see everything regardless of where you sit. Also, these seats may look like an expensive leather, but they're not. Don't get your hopes that this will be super comfortable. As is, the vehicles are good and they fit in the Ministry quite well. Before departing, employees told everyone not to cross their legs and also said to have good posture because it's a courtroom. I think the posture thing is actually not a safety thing at all, and just a fun little joke that the employees say to sell the fact they're not ride operators. Honestly, I love that. A fun little joke right before the experience really starts. I think it's a great beginning. And now, you depart. The moment you enter the actual ride, there is something major I have to address. The screens. I've been very hard on the Harry Potter ride screens in the past. I find them completely unconvincing for Forbidden Journey, and certain scenes on Escape from Gringotts are uncanny. Voldemort looks twice his normal size at some points. Here, I can't complain. Maybe it's because we're further from the screens, or maybe technology has just improved that much. But these screens look great and very convincing. There was not a single moment where I thought things looked off. So congrats Universal for solving the biggest problems on both of the previous Harry Potter rides. It's nice to start with some praise, but just seconds later I have an issue with this ride. The first thing we see is a bunch of elevators like the vehicle we're in but without seats. We see one with some random people in it, and one of them says, "Can you believe Dolores Umbridge is finally on trial?" And the other one says, "It's about time she stood in front of the wizards," or whatever. This sucks. I'm sorry. That is stupid, forced, pointless exposition. Why in the wizarding world would these characters be saying that as if they weren't already headed to a courtroom? It feels so weird. Why would a guy say that to another person he presumably hasn't met? If he had met her, they would have already discussed this. If he hasn't met her, what a weird thing to randomly say. Additionally, we, the rider, already know she's on trial. We don't need to hear that again. And some of you might say it's for single riders who skip the queue, but no. Nobody is skipping the giant poster that says Umbridge trial today. Additionally, the very next scene is Harry, Hermione, and Ron talking to you about the trial. Why did we have these random wizards say stuff we already knew? If you want to have dialogue to make the first scene more lively, have them say something interesting. I know this is unnecessary for some of you, but I don't care how expensive your dark ride was to build, no amount of flashy effects can cover up bad writing. I suppose there are technically some scenarios where the guy could have said this line, but regardless, it doesn't do anything for the viewer. I have to assume that those who call this the best dark ride in the world find this moment very neutral, if they even remember it at all. I do know it's kind of insignificant, but some of the best dark rides in the world are greatly aided by stellar writing that naturally works its way into the story. Heck, Monsters Unchained is an exposition line where Igor says, "They're all out, even the really ugly one." This is something that guests can infer on their own, but they don't necessarily know it, and it's followed by an instantly quotable joke. This line on Ministry adds nothing and only leaves me cringing at how blunt it is. That's enough criticism for one line. On to the next scene. Here, there's a physical elevator with screens behind it and around it to sell the idea the elevator is moving through the halls. There are also screens in the elevator showing the main Harry Potter characters and Higgledy. This looks fantastic. It's a very fun mix of physical sets and screens. I like looking at that trick a lot, especially since I know what it looks like when the screens are shut down. However, I have another complaint. This one was harder for the park to work around and it's more excusable, but it's the fact that the people we see on the screen are not the actual original actors. I believe none of the main three actors recorded lines for this either. I'm not too knowledgeable on the original performances, but the moment Harry started speaking I thought, that's not Daniel Radcliffe. They had someone do an impression, and it just doesn't sound right. The delivery is unnatural and almost creepy. Granted, it's also just not a very good delivery or a good line. Harry says, "And we can't be late. I don't want to miss this." It would be really nice if they could improve the writing here, and this time the delivery just isn't doing it any favors either. So the first 20 seconds of the ride is riddled with poor and pointless dialogue. These scenes themselves were necessary for setting up the elevator system and the main characters, but I wish the dialogue added anything to the cool effects that we're seeing. Anyway, right after this, the ride gets a lot better. There's a sound and a shake as the main characters wonder what's going on. We then pull in front of the elevator that Umbridge is in, and we see her and a Death Eater successfully beat the guards. I have to give credit here. This scene is perfect. The elevator stops, so I thought it was surrounded by physical sets. But then it started going up and the walls followed, so it has to be screens. The ride completely fooled me and had me believe the screens were real things. Additionally, Umbridge makes one heck of a first impression. Imelda Staunton, the original Umbridge actress, reprised her role, and wouldn't you know it, she gives by far the best performance of the ride. Her dialogue is stupid, obnoxious exposition stuff, but her pompous voice and cartoonishly evil tendencies make it work so well. She says out loud, "To the time room," like she was Batman going to the Batmobile. And when this dialogue is coming from a ridiculous villain and not casual conversation, it works, especially with a very talented actress behind it. So yeah, pretty stellar beginning to the main conflict of the ride. I could note that when I wrote it, the audio was not synced, meaning Umbridge's lips did not match her speech. But I didn't really care. I still found this moment to be quite great. Umbridge also has the Death Eater Yaxley use a spell on us to knock the elevator backwards. We tumble around to the next scene. At this point, Harry slows down our vehicle with some magic spell, and we get some more exposition from the main characters. Fortunately, this part makes a lot more sense. Umbridge escaping is completely new information, and it makes sense that not everybody in Harry's elevator would know what's going on. We know Umbridge escaped because we just saw it happen, and we know she says to the time room, but we didn't necessarily know that she was after a time turner like Ron says here, so the exposition actually quite works. I should note, this scene is basically exactly like the last two. You sit in front of the physical elevator with the characters in it in the screen, and the effect loses a little luster. It's still well done, but I'm more neutral on this scene than that second one. Still, a net positive. And the next scene might be the best on the whole ride. You enter the Ministry Archives and see a Death Eater in a wizard's duel with Hermione. On its own, that's standard Dark Ride stuff. But this scene is elevated by the Death Eater being an animatronic on a physical platform, while Hermione is on a screen. This is something I've wanted to see on Dark Rides for a while. Physical characters interacting with screen ones. It's a dream come true. The Death Eater is a wide range of motion, and the fact their face is covered means the park didn't have to focus on mouth movements. They can invest some realistic motions in the arms and body. The set is enormous, and the screen blends perfectly. Truly, I forgot that Death Eater was an animatronic at points. It just blends in an impressive way that I can't find any faults in. The scene is quite dynamic. That Death Eater takes multiple shots, one after another, so it's not only visually impressive, but also well choreographed. You move closer to the Death Eater as they try to stop you, but some ghosts appear and they say something and distract it, I think. I couldn't really make out what they were saying. After this, you continue through the archives and encounter another Death Eater, this one kinda battling Harry. The set remains grand, but the Death Eater really just stands there and does nothing meaningful until we start to get away. Therefore, this scene is not nearly as well thought out as the previous and also is less impressive. The Death Eater just doesn't interact at all, not even with the screens. But still, that first scene with the Death Eater is breathtaking. Now we enter the Department of Magical Creatures. I have no idea why Umbridge went there. If you know the reason, comment down below and I will pin it because I honestly can't think of any reason why she would end up in that department. While here, she traps Higgledy, says to the time room again, further confusing me as to why she stopped here, and then sends you down a level that presumably had a bigger drop in the past, but oh well. And you see a giant rhino-like creature. I looked it up, the creature is called an erumpent. It's apparently weighing up to a ton, but after seeing that thing, a ton has to be a gross underestimate. Anyway, the erumpent runs around and tosses you into the air with its horn, and this scene illustrates perhaps the single largest issue with the ride. I've critiqued minor things so far, like poor dialogue and uninteresting staging, but there is a consistent problem throughout much of this ride. That is that I never felt like I was actually there. The erumpent scene is the best example. When you get tossed in the air, it doesn't feel like your vehicle is getting thrown. It feels like you're watching the camera angle change in front of you. This is a shame because one of the greatest strengths of the other Harry Potter dark rides is making you feel like you're in the action. On Gringotts, you're on a roller coaster track, so when you're pulled by a dragon or pushed by the Iron Giant, you feel that movement, and you're actively being moved by the things happening on screen. Forbidden Journey isn't really convincing on the screen parts, but the robot-armed ride system means that when you get up close to one of the animatronic things, you quickly change course in a way that makes you feel like you really are there. On this ride, even things like getting shot by the Death Eater at the very start, and then moving backwards, feel disconnected from each other. In general, it just doesn't feel like you're actually there. The Erumpent is the worst one. It's the most dependent on the screen, and that is kind of why I think that is the worst scene. But throughout the ride, I feel like I'm just watching things play out in front of me. It's like being seated for a movie, except the characters happen to be talking to you. So I guess it's like watching Dora the Explorer. I don't know if the ride system is the issue. Maybe having a back corner seat is the reason why I was like that. If you rode this and didn't have that issue, let me know what seat you were in. Maybe that seat could be why. But I'm not sure it is though, because the ride vehicle feels a lot like a motion simulator. And I think it was conceptually a bad call if they wanted to make you feel like you were in the action. I liken it to Skull Island Reign of Kong. But even that one's better because there's screens on multiple sides of you, whereas this one is only straight ahead. I don't think this ruins the ride, and I don't hate the Erumpent scene, but the fact that I didn't feel like I was in the action made the ride less interesting and engaging, and it might be the biggest difference between my ride experience and that of those who love this ride. After this scene, you turn 180 degrees and look at a wall for 5 seconds. This part annoys me a little, as even though it's a very minor dip in excitement, everybody's giving Monsters Unchained so much flack for this exact same kind of thing. I recognize that the backstage might be a bit more obvious on Monsters Unchained's transitions, but this gave the exact same energy as the worst moments on Monsters for me. Granted, that's a minor thing, and it's not like I was super excited leading into it anyway. Next, we come across a grand Erumpent animatronic. It's beautiful, and it feels like Universal was just flexing here, but I'm very happy this scene exists. I was confused as to how the Erumpent ended up on a wall facing the way it was, because it meant it would have had to run through the previous room, go around another, and crash through a wall on the opposite side. I think the idea is that we're leaving the previous room and then just arriving to the other side of the wall, but it doesn't feel like that because you spin around very obviously and stare at that wall for a while. The extended break does kind of ruin that. When Universal Beijing's ride did this thing where you have the animatronic on one side and then you're going to the screen on the other, you don't turn around. The animatronic and screen are on the same side of the room to avoid that issue. Maybe it wasn't feasible here and the creatives did the best they could, but either way, the animatronic is great. The dialogue from Harry and friends here returns to unnecessary exposition, and Ron says, "Let's get out of here before this thing explodes," or similar. Which is a lot of words to speak for someone trying to escape an exploding capsule. I would say that is a bad line of dialogue. I also kinda wish we got to see the elevator explode, but maybe it does and I just missed it because I was sitting furthest away from it. Next scene is Umbridge and Higgly in the time room. That is where the third act of the ride really begins. Umbridge announces she's going back to Voldemort's time, and she has some great deliveries like, "You're too late," and "nonsense." She tries to repair a broken time turner and then shatters them all, and somehow there's an entire wormhole opening up in the time room. As that starts, Umbridge yells directly at us, "This is your fault." That was the moment that made me feel like I was actually playing a role in the story, and it's such a funny one. I actually did laugh out loud when she said it. It's perfectly in character, and it was entirely unnecessary to the story. It just makes the ride more entertaining, and that's what I love. The next room is gargantuan. It shows the Ministry in disarray as the wormhole stuff happens. I have to admit, this part's awesome. The way the pendulums swing towards you really make it feel like they're actually there, even though they are on the screen. The sound design is also fantastic. You hear bells going off in an ominous yet beautiful way, with some reverse effects put on them to really sell that whole time thing. This is another of the best overall scenes on the ride, both in terms of scale and presentation. It's also somewhat unique because the other Harry Potter rides don't really deviate from the source material, but I don't think the unraveling of space and time is something that really happens in the books, so it's interesting. Next up, we see an Umbridge animatronic for the first time, and I have to point out another issue here. This animatronic just doesn't look right. Its movements as fluid as any other one, but the face is jarringly different from the real Umbridge. Her eyes are lifeless, worsened by the fact that you're so far away from it. The face issue is not a problem for the Death Eaters because they wear masks, and also not for Higgledy because she's a computer-generated character. Animatronics haven't really mastered human faces necessarily, and this Umbridge animatronic falls into that uncanny valley, most notable when paired with the expressive voice work. Anyway, Higgledy somehow steals Umbridge's wand. I'm not really sure how it happened, but she says out loud, "Now Higgledy has your wand," and I am somewhat grateful she spelled it out for us. Umbridge then gets sucked into the wormhole through a clever transition between the animatronic and screen. Harry and Ron are also there now, and then they grab Umbridge. Harry responds to another villainous line by saying, "You must not tell lies, Professor." This is a great callback to the books that I am familiar with. I won't explain it here because someone else definitely understands it better than I do and can do a better explanation, but it is a satisfying moment. This scene's another where I didn't actually feel like I was there, it just seems like you're watching things happen on the wormhole. But it's still pretty fun. Then the wormhole closes and everything goes black. Next thing you know, we're in the courtroom with Umbridge, Ron, and Harry. I was baffled. How did they get there after being sucked into a wormhole? I know time travel is not perfectly explained in most media, but it seems to me that the characters were all trapped in there. It's a bit of a shock, but either way, we're in the next room and I will praise the ride for getting us there the way it did. We turned counterclockwise, presumably facing back where we had come from, and then the courtroom's there. I'm not sure how they got us there without us seeing what was behind us in previous scenes. So props. But this is a good scene overall with some fine dialogue and a fun effect that changes Umbridge's dress to a prison one. The characters are all animatronics, but once again, Umbridge is the only one that stands out, because the other ones sort of hide their faces. Smart move. Then, you get your photo, Higgledy lies by saying you helped save the Ministry, Hermione waits for an uncomfortable amount of time, and so ends the supposed best dark ride in the world. Overall, I very much enjoyed Harry Potter and the Battle of the Ministry. The many environments you get to see are creative and well executed. The ride is grand in scale. Umbridge serves as a fantastic and memorable villain for the ride, and the screen usage is honestly game-changing. This ride will hold up for years to come, and it will influence many dark rides in the future, no doubt. However, while I was riding, I was certainly bothered by the lackluster script and occasionally bland sequences. I recognize that more feels like a movie complaint than a theme park one, but a well-executed story can really improve a dark ride. For example, The Amazing Adventures of Spider-Man at Islands of Adventure is my favorite dark ride. It has game-changing screen usage and impressive effects, but also a hilarious script and non-stop action that enhances the story. On this ride, Imelda Staunton really did all the heavy lifting when it came to memorable lines. Even so, nothing on this ride compares to "We haven't lost anyone yet, not this week anyway," or "Welcome to Gringotts, the safest place on Earth," from the previous Harry Potter rides. I feel like while the ride is very grand and impressive, Battle of the Ministry lacks personality because of those story issues. Additionally, I simply can't ignore the fundamental flaw that seems to be tied to this ride system. The other Epic Universe dark rides make you feel like you're really there in the middle of the action. Ministry feels like a very passive experience to me. That issue makes Ministry just less fun to ride than it could have been. I know my take will disappoint some of you. You're certainly hoping that everyone loves the ride, including me. And I do like it. The good scenes more than outweigh the bad, and the best technical aspects are some of the best on any dark ride. But it's immensely handicapped by the fact that it just seems like you're looking at stuff from so far away. So as you might have guessed, I don't think this is the best dark ride in the world. I don't think it's the best dark ride in the park. I would call it better than Forbidden Journey and Escape from Gringotts, mainly because the ride experience is consistently engaging comparatively, and these screens are a drastic improvement. That said, there are major things those rides do better than this one. If you think it's the best dark ride in the world, that is great, and I can definitely see why so many are that impressed by it. I think this ride is definitely worth riding once if you have time at the park. But unless the wait time falls to 45 minutes, I'm probably never riding it again. To end this review, I will be giving the ride a number score out of 10. A 1 means it is among the absolute worst of Universal attractions such as Fast and Furious Supercharged, a 10 means it is among the absolute best, such as Velocicoaster or Spider-Man. Those scores are just my opinion, as is the score for Battle at the Ministry. I will be giving Battle at the Ministry a 1 out of 10, I'm just kidding. I will be giving it an 8 out of 10. It's no doubt a great dark ride with plenty of fun moments and plenty of breathtaking ones, but there are many things about it that just aren't for me. And that concludes Epic Universe Reviews. Thank you for watching and I hope you enjoyed this video. Make sure to check out the other 10 reviews if you haven't already, stay tuned for a full ride ranking and plenty of other videos about Epic Universe, and watch some of the hundreds of other videos already on my channel. subscribe for more theme park videos. I'll see you next time.